Thank you. Good evening, everyone, particularly welcome members of the public. If I could ask everyone in the chamber to please stand for acknowledgement of country. Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and their ongoing spiritual commitment to the land on which we meet tonight. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Council's prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech thee to vouchsafe thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of thy glory and to the true welfare of the people of the city of Clarence. Amen. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube. What is said at this meeting is not protected by privilege. There is a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. First of all, we do have Alderman Pearce on leave and all other aldermen are present. Are there any declarations of interest of alderman or close associate? Thank you. Item 4 comprises a number of items which we'll deal with one motion at the end. Firstly, the confirmation of the minutes for the 4th of July as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. A Mayor's communication, I'd like to table diary entries and events for myself and Deputy Mayor over the last 3 weeks. .3 Council notes the workshops that were conducted on the 11th and 18th of July and the agenda briefing on the 22nd of July. 4.4 Tabling of petitions. Are there any petitions? 4.5 Reports from outside bodies. Firstly, single and joint authorities, the Copping Waste Transfer Authority, Alderman Walker. I have nothing from the Greater Hobart Committee and I'd like to table the quarterly report to the 30th of June for Taswater. From special council committees and other representative bodies, we have Tracks and Trails Committee quarterly report. The NRM and Bicycle Committees also got their quarterly reports. The recommendation being there that the chairperson's report be received. Are there any other reports? Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the Belrive Community Arts Centre minutes for meeting of the 13th of July. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the minutes from the Richmond Bicentennial Committee on the 26th of June.
Other reports? In that case, that the 4.6, the information contained in the weekly briefing reports for the 4th, 11th and 18th of July be noted. In the absence of any comment on any of those, I'll call for a motion that we adopt the officer's recommendation in regard to all those reports. Thanks, Alderman Edmonds. Second, Alderman Warren. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. I'd now like to invite a procedural motion. I note that we've received a report from the General Manager in regard to an urgent item, which will become item 8.4.4. Thank you, Alderman Warren. Second, Alderman Mulder. Being procedural, there's no debate. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, public question time. Questions on notice, we have nothing there. 5.3, answers to previously questions taken on notice from Mr and Mrs Marsh. The answers are in the agenda, so I'll take those as read. Moving on to questions from members of the public without notice, if there are any. Thank you. We have 2 at the back there. If we could please invite them forward.
My name is Joanne Marsh and I live at 32A King Street, Belrive. Claims have been made that the Council systematically plans and funds the renewal of roads, footpaths and stormwater systems over the long term. I recently conducted an audit of the tired, unloved curbs and footpaths on Belrive Bluff. I noted many inconsistencies in the provision of DDA compliant curbing and many examples of rough, unsafe footpaths caused by tree roots, asphalt adjoining concrete slabs, service lids, gravel and potholes. This increases the vulnerability of some community members to accident and injury. So my question is, how long-term is the wait for this infrastructure to be renewed?
Thank you for your inquiry. We'll certainly take that on notice and have a response in the next council agenda.
Thank you.
My name is Victor Marsh. I live at 32A King Street, Belrive. On Wednesday the 24th of October 2018, engineers and SES personnel were urgently sent to Blunston Arena with large heavy cranes to prevent the Western Light Tower from collapsing due to the gale force winds the previous day. It was quickly realised that the bolts connecting the tower at the halfway point had deteriorated. Eventually all 4 light towers were made safe. My question is, what measures has the council taken to make sure these light towers are being monitored, particularly around where the towers are joined due to the continuing issue of the corrosive salt-laden air?
Thank you, Mr Marsh. We'll certainly take that and ensure there's an answer in the next papers. Any other questions without notice from members of the public? Thank you. Moving on to item 6, deputations by members of the public. I understand we have 2.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 deputations tonight. The first deputation is from Mrs Sally O'May of Howrah. If you'd like to come up to the microphone.
While you're coming forward, I do need to remind speakers that under meeting regs we've only got 3 minutes. There'll be a tone sound at 2.5 minutes to give you a reminder.
Good evening, Mayor and Alderman. I submitted a letter last week, or an email last week, to the Council in relation to a large stormwater drain that is directly outside my home. I live at 24 Anolka Street, Howrah, and I've been a homeowner and ratepayer for 40 years. There's a big issue with that drain, particularly on the 6th of May when we had that very big southeasterly storm. Water was overflowing from that drain and running down the street as well as down the pipes. But I also sustained quite a bit of damage to my roof cavity, and I actually have a butterfly roof, which is, you know, a butterfly with a gully in the centre. And I had a new roof, gully and rain box put on in 2012, and I've never had any issues with water damage. What I believe is that the stormwater from my drains could not get out into the gutter, and it was pushed back up the drains because of the velocity of water that's coming into that drain in front of my home. It comes down from Glamorgan Street, along Corella Street, crosses over Anolka Street and down towards the foreshore. On Friday, I took the time to visit some of my neighbours on that side of the street, and most people didn't have any drainage or flooding issues, but there is a lot of drainage problems in the Anolka Court, which is just down from my home, and water that was left laying in Anolka Court after the storm. And that's not just really on the 6th of May. I have to get the council to come out and put the steel lids back on the stormwater drains, because the force of the water is pushing those steel lids up, and as I believe, some of that water has caused my home damage, and I believe that's the case.
Thank you, Mrs May. I note you've given us a copy of your comments, and we'll make sure we'll get back to you on what our plans are.
Our second deputation tonight is from Mrs Janet Upcher of Opossum Bay.
Good evening, Mayor and Alderman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My deputation concerns the state of the beach, the river and my boat shed at 40A Spit Farm Road, Opossum Bay. I want to make three main points. Councils are usually expected to take responsibility for maintaining infrastructure of our coastal towns and for the maintenance of beaches and rivers in keeping with the laws of the EPA and the coastal erosion policy. Current reconstruction of stormwater infrastructure and beach access at Opossum Bay is causing extreme concern to residents. Second point, my boat shed has an historical significance which is of value to the community. Thanks to council inaction over 25 years, its maintenance is in jeopardy. Third point, serial neglect over many years has meant that whilst I have continually paid rates and land tax on my boat shed and land at 48 Spit Farm Road, I've been unable to use it constructively, as it has not only been subject to flooding, sinkholes and erosion, despite several requests to council to address this. More significantly, it has been used by Clarence Council since 1996 without my permission for the introduction of a diagonal concrete pipe and concreted sandbags on my land, supposedly to support the adjoining beach access ramp and steps. The history of this is, in 1996, significant damage was caused to the beach access adjacent to my boat shed. The concrete ramp collapsed due to stormwater overflow. My boat shed structure was damaged and access affected for several months. This was deemed an act of God or a once-in-a-100-year event. However, the supposedly unique once-in-a-century event has subsequently recurred 3 times. Each subsequent overflow could have been prevented had it not been for Clarence City Council's inaction and failure to remedy the inadequate filtration. May 2018 and 2021, despite ineffectual measures to prevent recurrence of overflow, substantial storm overflow has been caused to my own property and that of my neighbour, despite our frequent requests for Clarence Council to remedy the problems. Photos, which I'll leave, reveal sinkholes, deep erosion of soil and damage to my neighbour's foundations as well as my boat shed. Following the 1996 catastrophic event, I received a letter of apology acknowledging error from Mr Frank Henderson. Clarence Council had introduced a large concrete stormwater pipe along with several cemented sandbags onto my privately owned land. This infrastructure was an unintended error, as shown in his letter. I'll leave a copy of that too. Mr Henderson made it clear that any future problems arising from intrusion on my land would be rectified by Clarence Council.
Mrs Upcher, I'm afraid we are out of time. I am happy to follow up on this. Perhaps you could leave a copy of what you haven't been able to finish.
I shall. My main point, if I may say, is that at this point in our history we need to consider a new way to live in this world and to respect our planet. And what's happening with the subcontractors is causing such damage to the beach that that's not happening.
Thank you, Mrs Upcher. Which brings us to item 7, Planning Authority matters, and I advise that Council now intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Item 7.1 is a development application at 37 Howrah Road for the demolition of an existing dwelling and the construction of a new dwelling. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Ewington. A seconder. Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Alderman Ewington.
Look, all I can say is, I suppose, as I always say in this situation, is obviously these guys have got to comply with the planning scheme. They've gone through the process. You know, as is the case in a lot of situations, there was a couple of representations, but the officers have dealt with those and come up with recommendation that we approve this development. I can't see anything in there that would make me want to change my mind, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you. Alderman Bond.
Nothing to add, thank you, Mr.
Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In fact, there wasn't 2 representations, there were in fact 5, and if this matter did meet the planning, Clarence interim plan correction, the Tasmanian planning scheme, Clarence's local provisions, then in fact we wouldn't be dealing with it at all. So in actual fact there have been a number of representations, 5 in number, and most of those, in fact all 5, have opposed this on the basis that there have been some concerns in regarding the building envelope, the impact on the through bulks and scale, sand erosion and traffic. This is in a particularly vulnerable area, and we just heard from one of the members of the community in relation to where some of these developments are occurring and where council has basically been involved in them. This particular matter has had to have a number of representations, and more importantly, on page 28, it has there at item 7, prior to the issue of a certificate of likely compliance or building permit, a construction management plan is to be provided following the recommendations within the Coastal Vulnerability Assessment, Geo-Environmental Solutions, March 2022. And in accordance with Wetlands and Waterways Works Manual and Tasmanian Coastal Works Manual, to the satisfaction of Council's Group Manager Engineering Services when approved. Now look, the property is indeed mapped in the coastal inundation and erosional hazard prone area, and therefore a hazard report is required for coastal inundation and erosion from a suitably qualified person. This is right on the actual borderline in relation to Little Howrah Beach. We're in that vicinity. This is a particularly concerning matter because it does address some of the key issues in relation to coastal vulnerability assessment and also the Wetlands and Waterways Works Manual. And that is actually written, Mr Mayor, in fact in part 7 of this particular project. I think this is too close in proximity to the coastal area. It does not meet in all circumstances the Tasmanian Interim Planning Scheme, Tasmanian local provisions. I will not be supporting this as I believe it's inappropriate and therefore it is going to impact on our vulnerable assessment in relation to coastal vulnerability and also on the Waterways Work Manual and Tasmanian Coastal Works Manual.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Youngkin. So the motion is, the recommendation is approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 7.2 is a development application at 233 Cambridge Road, Warrane, for 7 multiple dwellings, 1 existing and 6 new, and an outbuilding. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In accordance with notice given, I move, as listed and been circulated, that a development application for 7 multiple dwellings, 1 existing and 6 new outbuilding at 233 Cambridge Road, Warrane, be refused for the following reasons. The proposal...
Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second it, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Bonberto.
Thank you, Alderman Bonberto. The proposal does not comply with performance criteria B1, as with respect to the development does not have private open space associated with Unit 1, convenient located in relation to private open spaces for Units 3, 5 and 7. That's a direct quote from the officer's report, and that by the very nature is addressed in the officer's report. But more importantly, part 2, the proposal does not comply with performance criteria P1 of clause C3 5.1c under the Road and Railway Assets Code, as the development does not minimise the safety of vehicular traffic crossing the junction with Cambridge Road. I know, Mr Mayor, there have been a number of my colleagues who have actually been to the site and have been referred to, amongst other things, by a member of the public who very graciously mentioned that they had attended, and obviously they did look at the matter and made some sort of assessment in their own right, and that's great. The particular concern here is it's on a sweeping corner. It's very, very difficult to see, and under reasons B.2, it says Cambridge Road is a secondary road acting as a feeder road for residential properties. The site distance to the east is 60 metres, which is 5 metres less than the required 65 metre sight line for a 60 kilometre frontage road. The proposed development would generate 42 vehicle movements per day, which exceed the 40 vehicle movements per day. The fact of the matter is this is on a very, very dangerous corner. It's in close proximity to what is, I think, is a blind corner, and therefore the traffic that will be generated, not only from this new proposal, but also the fact of the matter is that there will be very, very difficult movements to and from the property because of the number of vehicle movements per day. I seek council support.
Thank you. Alderman von Bertog.
No additional comments, Mr Mayor. Alderman James has covered everything very succinctly. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Mayor, I won't be supporting this particular motion, although the points raised are quite accurate and quite well. The main issue that I would really concern about is that road safety issue. It is within 5 metres inside the site corners, and it is a particularly nasty little bend with no sight line at all. And if you are stopped there and you start to emerge, it'd be very easy to get T-boned. The thing that cropped up with me, and I have made the suggestion but I haven't got any feedback on it yet, is that perhaps if the entrance were to be moved across a bit further across that property, the access way would actually meet the 65 kilometre design, and I'm sure that if the proponents were mindful to do that, then given the fact that that the suggestion has come from the body of council, that perhaps we would waive any fees for for an alteration to that design, because that would then make it totally compliant with the road code, even though that extra 5 kilometres wouldn't do me, given me much comfort that it's going to make that much difference. However, it would then conform with the code and there'd be no particular dramas. It's a fact that the infill in the area in Warrane is becoming, and it's interesting to note that we'll be talking about homelessness and the affordability of housing and social housing and those sorts of things. So when you start to increase the stock of housing in this way, I think it's appropriate, and I don't really see a reason why we would not support this. The thing about moving the access is that the neighbouring block, which I've also had a look at, and I spoke to the tenant there, and that's one of the representatives, eventually May itself is also a large old-style open land and may very well become subject to a development application. And if that's the case, then the access will be even worse. However, if the front end access was created so that it went further along in front of 233 and even 231A and provided a joint access for all those properties in that area, you would meet the roadway safety code, you would meet the road code, and we would get it through. But I mean, the 5 metres for me is just not enough reason to refuse this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Newington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I can agree with Alderman Mulder there. I mean, look, I'm not so concerned about the 5 metres, but at the end of the day, I mean, the traffic impact statement addressed these issues, and the assessment was made that it was safe. I mean, we certainly need the infill housing and other options for people to enter the housing market, or even to have a house to live in, whether it's their first house or their 10th house, doesn't matter. But I think these sort of smaller dwellings are really what is needed to give people more choice out there, and that's certainly a reason to support this sort of thing. But I mean, I do get a bit concerned though too about we're making out that I mean, I know we do see some bad drivers out there at times, but, the vast majority of people do the right thing. They slow down appropriately. They'll take time coming out. And I think, we're overstepping our mark a little bit when we're treating people like mugs and thinking that they can't navigate their way in and out of some of these roads. So, I've got a little bit more faith in people doing the right thing. And, the traffic assessment has to take into account data that's developed by experts over many years. And if they say it's okay, well, it's okay with me. So I certainly won't be supporting this motion. I'll be quite happy to support the officer's recommendation, which is for approval.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I did take the opportunity to visit this property today, and certainly it's a blind corner. There's very little sight line. I was coming from the Mornington direction and so I was on the side of the property, and I turned into 231, and there were people coming up behind me who wouldn't have had very much warning that I had slowed down. So you can imagine adding another 42 cars to that spot. It's just a matter of time before there's an accident. Getting into 231 was difficult, so I don't think moving the access on 233 is going to make a difference. And certainly we can't take into account what might happen at, it would be 229, would it, with the next one along, which may be developed in the future, so we can't take that into account in tonight's deliberations. But from what I observed today, there's definitely an unsafe turning point there, and if it doesn't comply because it's 5 metres short, then I think that's a reasonable grounds for refusing this application. Sure, it's good to have infill housing, but not if those people are going to be at risk coming and going from the property.
Thank you. So no other speakers. Right, reply, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On page 72, one of the performance criteria which has been addressed is in relation to safety and vehicular traffic. This is C3.5.1. Vehicular traffic to and from the site must minimise any adverse effects on the safety of a junction, vehicle crossing or level crossing, or safety or the efficiency of the road, having regard to the increase in traffic generated by the use. On page 73, I'll only summarise again what was not actually addressed in the TIA, in that it was said that the site distance is less than the required 65 sight line for a 60-kilometre frontage road. Then the TIA doesn't then address that. What it says is that the 85 percentile vehicle speed from the west was noted as 55 kilometres an hour, for which desirable sight distance of 55 is required. So from the west they've addressed that, but they haven't counted the problem that there is a shortfall and that 5 metres less than the required 65 sight distance for a 65 kilometre frontage road. There is an anomaly here. It hasn't been addressed. There is a safety issue, and I seek council support.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is the alternative motion, which is for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Alderman Ewington, I take it? Yes, thank you. Do I have a seconder for the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Alderman Moulder. Alderman Ewington?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor. I think yes, for the recommendation.
Alderman Moulder.
Just in the previous debate, there was some reference about, treating motorists like mugs or suggesting that they don't by vast do the majority of things. Can I say after 40 years of experience that particular assertion is basically wrong, terribly wrong. That is exactly how most motorists behave, and I have absolutely no doubt that even though the 85 percentile of traffic coming around that corner is in fact travelling at, according to the traffic report, at 55 kilometres and not the required 60, you don't have to stand there long to find out what the other 15% are doing. Yes, it's a major rat run, it's a major thoroughfare, and people use it as such. But if you go back to actually the representatives, they actually say that they accept the fact that the development is going to occur, and they raise the issue with the road. And what I was putting forward was a suggestion maybe that, you know, as a council, we have some responsibility about these sorts of roads. And if we, you know, and if we do start to find we have accidents in that particular spot, despite, you know, whether we do or we don't make an adjustment, then I think that's rapidly going to start falling itself into the black spot category, and they're going to have to find some other means of accessing that traffic. Now, it's a bit hard to say to this particular developer, no, you can't have your units up there, but down the road, we've got a whole heap of units in exactly the same situation, although they've got a slightly better sight line, and this is only 5 metres short, remember? 5 metres short of the required sight line. And then we've got the housing, we've got the state government who is going to put a great heap of units up on the land behind the Warrane Primary School. That will also add more traffic to those particular things. So there's coming a time where I think we're going to have to look at the whole of Cambridge Road, its layout. Maybe we need to, you know, take some licence and have a system whereby there are shared entrances in these black spots, and there are things like, you know, maybe a no left turn as you're coming out, a no right turn as you're coming out of that particular driveway, and maybe there's, you know, we're going to have to do something about managing the dangerous situation that Alderman Warren, through no fault of herself, found herself in when she was trying to turn up to that road. It's not that these aren't problems, they are. It's just that there are solutions that can be found, and there are ways in which we can minimise or the risk of serious collisions. But I think as a development application, as a planning application, I think that basically it's sound, and it is actually supported by the neighbours.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you. I was trying to get the call in the first debate, but that's on me for not being with the mask. I don't think it helped. I was supportive of the previous motion because I thought that if there were enough numbers, we could do the sort of little bit of arbitration that Alderman Mulder touched on in his address, which I basically agreed with. We haven't got to that point. Been pretty line ball with this as is 5 metres, this decision. You know, Cambridge Road is a hectic place to live. I've lived on that in a 60 km/h area, granted not with a blind turn, but certainly with plenty of traffic, and it is a bit of a challenge. But, you know, I hate scenarios like this. I wish we had the stop the clock provisions, which have been spoken about when we have these sort of, we're nearly there, but we're not quite there developments, but we don't. And with the fact that we're not going to get to the point where there's going to be some discussion about the entry, I'm going to be supporting the officer's recommendation as well. Just to explain why I voted for both.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I am going to probably recycle some of the conversation that's already been had, because the bottom line is this isn't about the development, it's about the road. And I think we should probably touch on the development. It's 7 multiple dwellings, 1 existing, 6 new. So the existing dwelling is the existing dwelling, but if we go to the new ones, what are we talking about? Are we talking about 2-storey, 4-bedroom, double garage townhouses? No, what we're talking about are, I think, 3-bedroom, single level dwellings. And there's a real shortage of properties within Clarence, and this is the sort of thing that we should be encouraging. And I think, as I said, I think the concerns and conflicts aren't about what is being proposed there. And I'll touch a little bit on the density. If you do the maths, it's roughly working out about 329 metres squared. It's not that far from Eastlands. There is a bus stop. There'd be nothing to stop someone being a little bit more aspirational and coming to us with 9. But this is playing within the spirit of the rules and what they're about. And again, the conflict isn't the proposed dwellings, the conflict is around the road. So I am supporting the development application here. I'm aware of the impact and the concerns that the residents have, and I did visit the site as well. And I think what we need to be telegraphing is just, again, some of the wider pictures. It is an eminently rational basis on time to choose to go down Cambridge Road rather than to hit the Tasman Highway and come up and over and down Rosny Hill Road. It's an understandable thing why people are taking that trip. So part of our role is, again, negotiating with state government around the safety side of it, but also telegraphing the wider, if you like, solutions that will make this the less time rational way forward. And those conversations, I think, would be supported by both the proponents and the opponents in this situation, and again, the wider community. So I think that is the way forward. The way forward is negotiation, conversation and advocacy. It isn't rejecting 6 new dwellings of a size and scope that is desperately needed within our community.
Thank you. Other speakers? Norman James?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I was going to set this one out, but I think it's appropriate to follow on from the previous speaker, and as much as, okay, there is a shortage of affordable housing, and of course these particular dwellings are of a size and scale which in the appropriate location would be acceptable, and I would necessarily support it because of the density that has basically been provided here. But what we're talking about is the fact that there is a generation of traffic movements of the degree that will impact upon the safety of that particular area. And as that particular traffic generation will be impacted upon, not only on the Cambridge Road for those road users who are using it then, but also on the fact that it's going to be a safety matter which we've dealt with all along. It's okay to talk about affordable housing, and I'll be the first to get up there and support it, particularly if it's on flat ground, single housing, and within the 8.5 and the density requirements which we have all come to learn to live with. But this particular case is dangerous. It is dangerous for people that actually use Cambridge Road, as well as for the people that will be accessing the site to actually, as part of the 42 traffic movements today. I will not support this motion. As I said in the previous, we have to think about safety, 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 and not just go, gung-ho on let's have affordable housing, whatever, in whatever circumstances. We need to consider the planning scheme, and this particular matter is addressed in the planning scheme, and it's not appropriately supported as part of the impact on the road network from along Cambridge Road.
I think it's just worth pointing out, and I do this as chair, that the officer's recommendation does support this application. Your last comment suggested that that wasn't the case, so I just want to clarify that. Other speakers? In that case, right, a reply, Alderman Newington. So the motion before the chair is as recommended for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried, which brings us to the end of our matters as a planning authority. Moving on with the agenda brings us to item 8.4.1, which is a draft active living strategy for 22 to 32. Thank you, Alderman Newington. Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Kennedy, thank you. Alderman Newington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, it's very pleasing to be standing up here actually having this policy and strategy hopefully endorsed by Council. Obviously, I encourage my colleagues to vote for us in the first instance. Obviously one of the reasons why I stood for Council in the first place was to look at this area and try and improve what we do in this space in the city. I strongly believe that, creating great, public open spaces and picnic areas and playgrounds and sports grounds and increasing the amenity of our beaches and tracks and trails and bike tracks is a huge role of council and one of the most important things we can do to deal with what we all know out there at the moment, which is happening in front of us, which is the health crisis faced by the majority of our community in terms of chronic disease. And also too now with COVID, the only thing we seem to be talking about with COVID is we need more vaccines, but maybe if we've got more healthy people out there, we would not have the same impact on our community as what we've faced. And it's disappointing that there hasn't been a message that's been pushed by some of the people out there adding to the whole debate. But anyway, getting back to the the active living strategy here. And I mean, it's really pleasing too to see this, started off as a sport and recreation strategy, but it's more than just that. I mean, it is really about the active lifestyle of everyone in our community, and and getting away from just the sport and recreation focus. I've always thought organised sports focus. I've always thought for a long time that, we do spend a lot of money on some of the organised sports, and we have neglected some of the other public open space. And now there's a real move towards some of the incidental activities and infrastructure that supports people doing things in their own time, which I think is a big focus of this strategy. But a couple of other things I just wanted to highlight in there that I think are really important that we need to improve on. The structured application process for capital funding, we really need to get that transparency out there and increase community input into that process. If a community group wants, tennis club wants to, add to their another tennis court, or a football club wants to add another ground, or someone wants to do something, or even just a community group that's not an organised sports wants to, put in a change room on their local beach area. We don't have that formal application process, which is a big part of this strategy where, we get them all in one place, we can see them all in front of us, and we have the chance to go through and work out which ones we want to rank. And that's the role of the new committee, which will be established, to really help council prioritise some of these things. But having that structured process is really important at the beginning. I mentioned about the all ages and all abilities, playgrounds and picnic areas and those sort of things. And with a motion that Alderman Emmons put forward, a couple of months ago, we all need to do better in that space, including access to beach areas as well, and steps, ramps and paths, but also having equipment and spaces where everyone in our community feels safe, comfortable and able to get out there and keep active. The other couple of things, hospitality, services, looking at how we can actually, add amenity to some of the beaches and parks and playgrounds and even the mountain bike park, with having, whether it be food vans to make it easy for people to go and take their food vans in there, or even, I've talked about and got a motion on the books in relation to, a pavilion on beach areas, whether it be Bellreeve or Howrah or 7 Mile or Clifton or whatever, to look at ways where we can actually increase, have better DDA compliant toilets and showers and change rooms, and look at some other more innovative ways of actually delivering those things for the community, where there is a little bit of, we look at public-private partnerships that can fund those things, where everyone gets the benefit of, everyone likes to eat and drink and sit there and enjoy these sort of areas, and I think expecting the ratepayer to pay for every aspect of that means it's going to take us a long time to get there. But you look at beach areas around Australia, and most places have some form of, whether it be a surf club or a pavilion or a cafe or restaurants, and those sort of things I think can really add to the amenity. And I'm really looking forward to having that discussion with the community about their thoughts on that. And I think we did get some feedback in the survey results that supported that. And also, like I said, being innovative about how we deliver some of these programs, and and opening it up to some sports groups. They deliver activities on sports grounds, community groups in some of their halls. And then you've got things like and looking at how other not-for-profits and even commercial providers can add deliver programs and services in our spaces, and really making it open for business in terms of what we can do in that area. And I look at what has happened with the basketball in the city with the Swisher complex, where everyone pays to go in there, but that is chock-a-block with people all day, every day. And people are prepared to pay a little bit more for something that's done really well. And I think there are some other opportunities. We talked about a golf driving range and some of those things, which, something that we can look at down the track. But I think, being innovative and allowing people to know what they're doing to look at some opportunities in some of the areas that we might manage or have authority over. But the real issue that we need to look at is, how do we make all this happen? And that's the next step. It's all right to have a strategy, but how are we going to fund it? How are we going to resource it internally in council? How are we going to actually, get the community to get behind these sorts of things and come out there and tell us that that's what they want to see happen? I think the 32 master plans we've got sitting there suggest that we've got to do better in this space, and I hope...
Thank you, Alderman Ewington. Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be very brief after that. I'd just like to congratulate the staff for the work they've put into this document. It is an excellent document, and I'd also like to thank the public for their feedback, because there's a lot of information there and a lot of time has been spent on providing that feedback. So very happy to second this. Great document, well done, and I look forward to seeing it rolled out.
Thank you. Other speakers? Walker.
Yeah, look, I do congratulate the work that's gone into this. It's a document that is concise. It's a document that is plain English in its nature. and it's a document that focuses more on tangibles than other matters. It's the way I'd like to see priorities and strategies develop. And again, I won't rehash a lot of what Alderman Newington went over, but this is the meat and veggies of the quality of life, the access to amenities, to places that really lift people's quality of life, and as we know through COVID, through other things, just how much more people have, I guess, come to understand the value of it. So, yeah, I get behind it and hope to see many of its aspirations fulfilled.
Thank you. Other speakers? Probably no need.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak.
Alderman von Berto, thank you.
I'll be very brief. I'd like to thank Alderman Newington as Chair of the Sport and Recreation Committee for all of the work that he has put into this strategy. He's worked very, very hard, and he's worked with the relevant staff to come up with this document. We've been through, as a committee, countless iterations, and that is thanks to the thought that Alderman Newington has put into it. So I think he needs to actually be acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman von Berto, and certainly that is recognised, I think, widely. Any other speakers? Right, a reply?
The only thing I'd like to say there, I mean, I appreciate that, Alderman von Berto, because yeah, it was something that I had a lot of passion for and put a lot of time and effort into. But I should thank Tanya Doubleday, who's probably the main staff member that I worked on, or we worked on, Sharon and Alderman von Berto and Alderman Pearce, and the community representatives that we had involved. Yeah, she was the one that sort of put most of the time and effort into compiling it all, putting all the information together and coming up with a final document. So I'd like to acknowledge her as well.
Thank you very much. The motion before the Chair is that we note the feedback and adopt the strategy. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously, and congratulations to all concerned. Item 8.4.2 is the draft community wellbeing strategy for 2022-32.
Mr Mayor.
Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Evans. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I guess can I also start by saying this strategy has been considered extensively over time, and can I thank particularly Tanya Doubleday, but also many of the staff that have worked on this and the community members that have been involved in very extensive consultation to get to this point today. I know not everyone agrees with how some of the things are split over the various strategies, but whatever you feel about that delimitation, no one should argue with the vision statement. Clarence, a city that values well-being. So whether you believe it's in the direct delivery of facilities or services, advocacy or provision of information, well-being is in some shape or form is absolutely our business. So this strategy highlights three things. So planning and partnerships, so a focus on working with people, but also on not duplicating services that are available elsewhere. It talks about spaces and places, particularly in conjunction with the active lifestyle strategy that we've just approved. And those two are really synergistic and have to be in how we deliver services and things for our community. And thirdly, opportunities for wellbeing. So a gamut of options for facilitating knowledge and access to information and providing access to exercise in a range of different ways. This strategy takes a whole-of-life approach, encompassing everyone in this city, whatever your age or role in our community. The projects that flow from the strategy will depend on the annual plans and the budgets, driven by community and by council and our priorities, but none of that can happen if we don't agree this strategy tonight. I urge my colleagues to support this, one of our 7 strategies from our overall strategic plan.
Thank you, Alderman Chong. Alderman Evans. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll be fairly concise. I mean, it still feels a little heavy on ideology and a little bit light on some of the tangibles that I like in this space. There are still elements within it that give me some discomfort. And one of those, if you look at, say, from the perspective I guess I bring to council and where I see sort of the priorities around our skill sets, I would have priority 1 listed as spaces and places, and planning and partnerships would go to number 2. Again, our strength is around the spaces and places place. What I will acknowledge is this document has been a long time coming. What I will acknowledge is that it's moved a considerable distance towards my area of comfort from where it began. And on that basis, I will try and display a degree of magnanimity, and I won't say that word again, and I will be supporting it. As I said, it's not how I would be doing if this was my thing, but I am but one of 12, and I think it's important when, to acknowledge accommodation when accommodation has been provided. So on that basis, I'm supporting it. It won't be an article of law. It is a guide and something to inform us as we go along.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. On page 166, under the public consultation feedback, it says, and I quote, during the consultation period, 10 responses were received via your say, 4 direct emails were received and 2 stakeholders met with council directly to discuss the strategy. I think that number is quite low when you consider that there has been a lot of effort put into this and basically what the end product is. I think we need to be a little bit careful about coming out with these wide-ranging strategies when in fact and okay, there's nothing wrong with this, to have this sort of strategy, but how are we going to have people be able to sort of pick out the key points and see where they are being involved as part of this particular wellbeing strategy? So it's 2022 to 2032, so it's going to not lock, but it's going to be there more of as a guide for the next council and beyond. And I do take heart from the fact that as we go along, we may need fine-tuning, Mr Mayor, and I think that will be the will of the council as to make sure. But it is just difficult to, on this far-ranging, and it's been out in the public arena for some months, that we only had 15 responses on what is going to determine where we head with this strategy over the next 20 years. I support it.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Just quickly, Mr Mayor, look, I have to agree with some of the comments raised by Alderman Walker and Alderman James there, but I suppose this is the real sort of, and I encourage, one thing that should happen when the new council starts to sit is that we really look at this issue about what do the community expect of us, and it's no good at us just being having our 12, one Bob's worth out of 12, but it's really asking the community where do they want to see more involvement, and I think with the look at the new structure of the committees, I think the most important thing there is that we really ramp up the community involvement in some of those committees, because I agree with Alderman James there. The number of, sometimes people complain about the things that we do, but then we give them the opportunity to have their 2 bobs worth. They don't tell us either. So I think certainly having an opportunity to review, the direction of our overall strategy and where we focus our resources and our money is something that we should be welcoming. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what we think. I mean, obviously we get different people in our ear telling them what they think we need to do. But I really think some form of way of really, and that's a huge decision for us to work out which way do we go in these spaces. But certainly having, ensuring community involvement in these committees moving forward and community representation is critical.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
No other speakers. Alderman Chong, rather reply.
Just very briefly, I guess I would like to mention that although, yes, there weren't many answers that came back when we put this out for consultation. If you look on page 167, when it talks about consultation, actually we talked to a lot of people developing this strategy. So both community associations, hall committees, neighbourhood houses, collective impact, the food and social support services and other communities, peak bodies. So there was a lot of consultation that went into developing the strategy. So by the time we got to putting it out for consultation, there wasn't necessarily going to be a great deal of community consultation back. I seek my colleagues' support.
Thank you. So the motion before us is that we note the feedback and adopt the strategy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And can I take the opportunity of congratulating Alderman Chong and her committee and the staff involved in the development of this, and also for those aldermen who have put a lot of effort into it in terms of feedback and refining of the policy. So thank you, everyone. It's a good effort. Item 8.4.3, that Council adopts the new Alderman Statement of Expectations and Alderman Issues Resolution Procedure. Thank you, Alderman Walker. Seconded, Alderman Kennedy.
I'm being presumptuous to assume that Alderman Kennedy is seconding the adoption of Alderman Statement of Expectations and Procedures alternate motion, which I've circulated amongst colleagues.
Okay. So it's can you confirm whether it's the officer's recommendation plus?
Yes.
Thank you. So there's an extra clause. Thank you. Are you happy to second that?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
All right, so I think I probably should concentrate mainly on the plus. The bottom line is this document's been delivered with a fair bit of work, a fair bit of refinement, and, you know, I guess if you like, it should be seen as a floor and not a ceiling. And if you want to think about what I'm doing with my alternate, which I'll read out briefly, it's, if you like, adding an optional mezzanine which people can choose to go up or not. So the alternate is that, subject to confirmation from the Director of Local Government that there are no legislative impediments, introduce a voluntary register of aldermen who have supplied details of a current Working with Vulnerable People ID card. The list of aldermen on the voluntary register would be published in both quarterly and annual reports. So a couple of things there. The topic of Working with Vulnerable People cards has come up recently in council meetings elsewhere. We can't just say thou shalt and must supply such a card. There are some legislative elements around that would make that not feasible. What I'm suggesting is something voluntary, and also getting the comfort of confirmation from the Director of Local Government that something we can actually do. So it would be very straightforward. I mean, here's my Working with Vulnerable People card, just giving the General Manager, providing to the General Manager to take a photocopy, and then again, every quarterly report, maybe annual report, a list of people who have chosen to supply that to Council would just form part of that on another page or addendum. And I think that can give a degree of comfort. We are involved with vulnerable members of the community, and you know, point one would just be even just thinking about some of the people that are on some of the committees that we work with, and then extending out from there. And again, I think we all like to often get involved with other people in the community, be it through the neighbourhood centres, community gardens, etc. So again, this is about choice. This is about people having the option, should they wish to do so, of providing that information. They don't have to. I certainly will be if the opportunity presents, and I'd be encouraging other people to do so. So that's the amendment. I don't think it places a very big administrative burden on council staff. It's going to be another minute and a half, I guess, for every quarterly report just to double check that page, and it would move forward from there. I think this is a prudent addition as far as risk management goes. I think this would have community support, and I would urge colleagues around the table to support this amended motion.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, this is something that is going to be required in so many different areas. Now is, and will be even more so in the future. And even just one of the areas that I work with in chambers sometimes with the judging of the Young Lions of the Year. You must have that card to be able to be a judge. So this is just something that is part of day-to-day life now. I have to have it in my working life. I think this is a very sensible addition, and I thank Alderman Walker for it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Blom.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and likewise I support this alternate motion. There's a number of boards that we're all involved in and organisations of the community where it is required, and clearly, as Alderman Walker and Kennedy have already pointed out, we, through our work, come into contact regularly with a whole range of community individuals. So I think it is appropriate that this Part B is included, and I thank Alderman Walker for doing the work on that front. With regards to the Alderman's statement of expectations and Alderman issues resolution procedure, as set out in attachments 1 and 2 of the associated report, Mr Mayor, it is worth noting that, firstly, a lot of work's gone into this. It's been a really good collaborative effort amongst the 12 of us, and I think where we've landed, it's a very positive place. I would just point out, though, that the review is every 4 years following each council election, so this will be up for review again in, 3 or 4 months' time. But I think it's a very healthy process as well to have that in place. But also, most importantly, for people that may join us in this chamber, they're fully aware of these two documents and what their rights and responsibilities are as leaders of our community. So I commend colleagues for their collaboration getting to this place with some very fine documents in front of us, and obviously the further enhancement of the motion tonight with Alderman Walker's addition.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Alderman Newington, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't going to support the other motion for a couple of things that I'll go into, and I'm not going to support this one either. I mean, as soon as you say something's voluntary, well, it's not. You know, and I understand the intent of working with vulnerable children and stuff, the police checks and all this sort of stuff, but to be honest, you know, we're struggling to get volunteers to do stuff. You know, and I mean, I just have a philosophical objection to the over-regulation of some of these things, and I know that they mean well, but you know, I just can't support it. I mean, you know, we're out there in the community. You know, we're going to be elected by the community. If we were out there, and there was a reason that people felt we were a bit dodgy, well, they probably wouldn't elect us, or they shouldn't elect us anyway, should they? And I suppose you look at all the things, you know, these sort of things have been around for a long time, and unfortunately, the people that have got motives that are not so pure usually find a way around them. So, you know, on that respect, I find it a little bit difficult. I mean, unless you're going to make it compulsory, it shouldn't be voluntary, because, you know, everyone's going to stand, and the person who doesn't do it for whatever reason they choose, everyone's going to point the finger at them and say, okay, why is he not doing it? So it's either it should be all in or none in. So I can't support that aspect. And look, in relation to the code, I mean, look, I raised this with my colleagues when we talked about it. You know, look, I mean, the intention for all of us is to represent our community, you know, have our points of view on things, have the opportunity to share what we believe in and what we think is the direction for the city and some of the things that we're passionate about. You know, we'll expect people to be courteous and kind and respectful of each other and do the right thing. And I think, you know, the vast majority of the time I'd say that's what's going on. I mean, every now and then we have a few disagreements, but, you know, there's some people that felt that some of the things that went on required us to go and spend, you know, $20,000 of ratepayers' money to go through this process, and I didn't support it at the time, and I still think it was pretty much a waste of money. It didn't tell us anything we didn't already know, and it didn't really give us any idea of what to come up with here. And the fact that they're all going to come up with a proposal that might make all this, you know, invalid or unnecessary because they're going to come up with a new recommendation means that I think it was a little bit premature. To think that we're going to come up with the answer ourselves that's going to be suitable across the state and for everyone, I think that's we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. But look, my main issue with the Alderman's statement, I raised this, was that, you know, the real issue that we've had with each other at times, and it's, you know, probably all of us, you know, at different times, is, you know, at times when we get into the, you know, the blatant politicking where we undermine either a council decision or another alderman in relation to verballing them or you know, misrepresenting them in either in social media or other things, or doing something for their own political game. Now, you know, we're all guilty of that at times, but, you know, if we're not going to include something along those lines, and, you know, we didn't get the opportunity to workshop that aspect of this, and I was disappointed that I didn't get any support except from one colleague, or two colleagues actually, that said, yeah, that's not a bad idea. But the fact that we didn't try and include that in there means to me, well, you know, if someone can give me a really good reason why we wouldn't want to at least address that, well, I'm happy to hear it, but no one gave me a really good reason. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And I mean, you know, we all want to make local government keep politics out of it and keep party politics for sure. And I think at least addressing that should have been something that we at least had the courage to attempt. And I'm disappointed that we didn't. Like I said, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone in particular, and I take responsibility for some of the things that I've said and done. at the time we all think we're doing the right thing, and I mean, in the heat of the moment, but if we're going to get better at stuff, let's get better at everything and not just, really all we've done is duplicate what's in the Code of Conduct, which says all the basic things like be nice to each other, be respectful, do the right thing. But if we're not going to go to the next step and really tackle the real issue, I really can't see the sense in it. So I won't be supporting this one, and I won't be supporting the next one, and that's all I've got to say on this one.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The title of this is Alderman's Statement of Expectations, and it goes on to refer to, amongst other things, the elected member's responsibility. Look, this should be reworded to what the community's expectations are of their elected representatives. And by the very nature of what occurs in this place or what we say and do in the public view, and now we have this wonderful IT presentation as part of what the public can tune in at any particular time and watch the performance of the elected representatives. And I think that has been absolutely one of the key factors that has turned this place around, and by the very nature of what we have been able to achieve in treating each other fairly and appropriately in this place. Now, on page para 4, inappropriate conduct, unreasonable behaviour. Really and truly, what do you expect? Is this the letter of the law? And all of these things that, and I quote, while a range of behaviour and conduct are precluded by legislation, there is also behaviour that falls below misconduct but is still unreasonable, including rude, loud, insensitive remarks. We know that's inappropriate. Why do we have to legislate it or put it into a document and have another bureaucratic overlay, which is really what this is all about? And it goes on to talk about swearing, shouting, name-calling or generally ranting out loud about something. Look, do we need to have that in this document, or do we need a document of this type in order to be able to represent the community and be judged accordingly at election time, which is coming up in October? And continually making jokes about a person or singling out one person for remarks more often than others in a group. But the interesting thing about this is, and there's another, personal attacks, threats and intimidation. Now, again, we are appropriate and responsible people. And surely to goodness, if the Director of Local Government and the Local Government Office is looking at a well sort of across the council, across the council, all councils within the state, to have some sort of code of conduct or reviewing it, then why do we have to have something like this, which is going to basically say, you're not going to do this correctly? You could be referred to another body which could deal with other than a code of conduct. Another point here is deliberate exclusion. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that somebody who does not wish to participate in the debate decides to not participate in the debate, and therefore they leave the room or do not participate in it? I don't think that's appropriate. If that person or persons that makes a decision in relation to that, then really and truly that ought to be judged by the people, by his colleagues, and by the necessary electorate at the time. Deliberately withholding information from someone where that information is essential to the ability to perform their work effectively. What a load of codswallop. We don't need to go down this far into a particular state of affairs. I will not be supporting this. I don't think it's necessary. I think we are responsible people, and therefore we should behave appropriately. And there has been a degree, in my opinion, it was mentioned a moment ago, that there has been a very definite change in the way we treat each other in this place. And that has come out of, I think, by the very nature of us having a think and deliberately concentrating on how we perform and also to how we believe our other colleagues ought to perform. I don't think it's appropriate. It's another, as I mentioned, level of bureaucratic overlay, and I don't think it's necessary in this circumstances. And I'll wait for the local government or the local government association to come up with something that goes across the board, and therefore it brings us all into the one family as far as elected representatives' responsibilities are concerned.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just would like to disagree with one aspect of what Alderman James just said, and that was that we're all responsible. Well, we're largely responsible. The question about this document seeks to address is our accountability for when we're not. And I think that's an appropriate distinction to be made. Having said that, I too find myself in some difficulty with this motion, even though this is the amended one, but it's an amendment to the greater motion. And I take the point. It's either that we have to have one or we don't have one in terms of the Working with Vulnerable People certificate. Because all sorts of issues can be raised. What happens if an alderman, for example, had a previous position where they had applied and had been refused because of some incidents or behaviours that were well known, but all the rest of it? Does that now disqualify that person from being on council because we've introduced a thing that's saying ideally you should have one? So, I mean, there are all sorts of difficulties with that. And I don't know why that has been introduced, because it's about our behaviour, not our past behaviour. So, okay. Then there's the issue of which Alderman James touched on. The Director of Local Government is in the armpits, and the Local Government Review is up to its armpits in working out the Code of Conduct. And yes, the Director of Local Government has said, in his all-powerful position that he occupies, that he sees no problem with councils working their own. This behaviour that's being described here is unacceptable in any council and in any forum and in anything. So why do we need a separate one for Clarence Council when the Director of Local Government is more than capable of working out some sub-code of conduct procedures that need to be addressed before they'll entertain code of conduct thing? And it needs to be consistent across the state. It needs to be consistent across the state. Then my particular bugbear, and there's some way has gone to addressing it, but the standard of behaviour expected to be adhered to is measured by how it is perceived by others and not how it is intended. Now, it's by others. I think the perception and the reality, and then we go on, and this was taken up in the workshops and it's been included, and for that I am appreciative. Conduct or behaviour that a reasonable person having regard. We should get out the perception bit or the intention bit, because the moment you do that is by whom is it perceived. You can say by others, but the classic thing with bullying, for example, is that the bully will immediately turn around and claim to be bullied when he's accused of bullying. So who's doing the bullying here, So I think we should simply go back to, if you're going to have something like that that inappropriate behaviour is defined as conduct or behaviour that a reasonable person having regard to the circumstances believe would be inappropriate within a workplace or work setting. And that's the basic reasonable person test, and that's the thing. There's nothing in here that says that this needs to be evidence-based, and that's the trouble you get if you have due process. If you don't have, you then fall into the due process traps, because you're dealing with how other people perceive things and not based on evidence. So I can see some flaws in documenting this kind of thing. And then come the issue resolution. It's all down to the Mayor being responsible for addressing issues of inappropriate conduct and unreasonable behaviour. This would not be the first council, should such a circumstances arise, where the Mayor is either the complainant or the perpetrator, or alleged perpetrator. So who deals with it then? Welcome Deputy Mayor, I suppose, but the document should say things like that, rather than making the Mayor the judge, jury and executioner of his own behaviour. So they are my concerns with why we need this particular form, without going down into the depths of the behaviour, but I will make it because I've got a few minutes. That conversations that directed to one particular councillor over the others. I mean, so now because someone is continually making assertions or something that you don't agree with, you're not allowed to raise it unless you raise it with other people who aren't making those assertions. I mean, it's just contrary to the common sense of debate that you say you're singling someone out. I mean, you know, are we not allowed to criticise each other? Are we not allowed to point out?
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Alderman Warren. And then Alderman John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This document's been a long time in coming. It would have been useful 3 or 4 years ago, but the fact that we have it now means that it's running into the Local Government Association producing the Code of Conduct, but I dare say it could be a useful document before that comes into being. I was at the Local Government Association AGM a few weeks ago, and David Dilger from Ledge Eagle, who's been working on a draft report for the Code of Conduct for local governments, said that he could reduce his 75-page draft report to the simple statement, be nice to each other. And if people were nice to each other, then none of it would be necessary. The case is it's not. It is necessary, because that's not what's happening. We've seen some appalling behaviour in this chamber. We've seen some behaviour, and I pick up on Alderman Newington's point about politicking. We've seen some politicking and attacking of other members of the council in the last few days on social media since this report was produced and given to us to endorse. So I guess I'm frustrated. I guess I don't think it will actually make any difference to this council, but I think that it will make a lot of difference to the next council to start with this as a statement of expectations and the ability for us to say, look, that is not acceptable behaviour, and to stop it before bad habits get entrenched, as I believe they did in this council. And we've spent a lot of time trying to overcome that. And this has to be a safe workplace for everybody, including aldermen at the table or councillors at the table. And that means being able to do your job without losing sleep over it because of the behaviour of other aldermen. So I think having a statement like this will go a fair way to that at the beginning of the new council, and then hopefully reinforced by the Local Government Code of Conduct. I can help Alderman James out with his concern about, exclusionary behaviour. That means excluding somebody through you, Mayor. It's not choosing to be excluded, it's where everybody else goes off to the pub and you're not invited because people don't like you. And that is a form of bullying. I also have just 1 or 2 points on the Working with Vulnerable People card that perhaps Alderman Walker could address in his right of reply. To my knowledge, unless this has changed recently, there's a choice of an employer card or a volunteer card. One is a little more expensive than the other. If it's not a condition of employment, we're saying it's optional, it certainly should be possible to get a regular statement from the Department of Justice who administers this scheme to just say, here are all the people registered as employers of Clarence Council who have a Working with Vulnerable card. So it shouldn't be a burden administratively from staff. But if you could just address whether that was your intention, that it be an employee card or a volunteer card, because they are slightly different. But I do endorse this statement of expectations and Alderman's issues resolution procedure. If everybody wants to make it work, it will work. So I don't think there's any point in nitpicking and semantics. I think what we need is some goodwill.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Alderman Chong.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I guess very briefly, we've ended up with this because we did not behave as a council responsibly, sadly. And there were many instances that we all saw, that the public saw around this council chamber. So for me, whatever the slight faults might be in this, it's really important that we have a statement that says this is how we think we should behave, and this is how we think the new council should behave as a starting point for them. If we'd gone back even a couple of years, perhaps this would have been good to put in place and might have stopped some of the poor, appalling behaviour that we saw here. We didn't have it then. Let's go into the new council with them understanding what decent, reasonable requirements should be of how we could all be nice to each other.
Alderman Evans.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I don't expect to, or really expect to top the previous couple of speakers anyway, but I would really just echo their comments. The fundamentals of, you read this, it's the fundamentals of basic respect. And that comment that, why can't we all just be nice to each other would be, a nice way through this. Comments about blatant politicking and misrepresenting positions on social media. It hurts you when people know the truth and then put a version of events that is not true to their fan base, for want of a better word. And there's really no way to deal with that, I suppose. Your leadership, Mayor, is what's got us this document. We had a position where we were fraying on a lot of issues. We had people from the floor trying to propose pathways forward out of frustration with what was happening. And I think you did a great job of bringing that together to then get us to agree for something. And we asked for this report and this guideline, policy. Those who chose to participated in the process, and we saw the report that came out of that, which I don't think anyone disagreed with the findings of. I think once we get this document in place for a new council, I think we've all reflected on our induction or lack thereof as new councillors whenever we were elected. I think if we get this, it'll be part of an improved induction process, which I think along with our improved communications, our better openness and transparency generally as a council, our improved consultation with the community, should, with the goodwill of the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and Alderman in the new council, lead to far less choppy waters for this council and I mean both in the elected sphere but also operationally. So I think these are improvements that we have actually made, and this is another one that we have made over the last 4 years, and granted a lot of it might have been only in the last 18 months, but that's going to be a better council no matter who the voters of this electorate put around this horseshoe in a few months' time. So I think with those words, that's why I'll be supporting this statement of expectations tonight, and just to echo what I said about thank you for starting that process. To Alderman Walker's amendment, I asked the same questions on Friday in the briefing, and I congratulate him on doing the legwork to actually get a motion, an amendment to the motion. And, you need a working with vulnerable people card to coach a junior soccer team. Think about all the places that we end up in. We had childcare centre visits, we deal with a lot of different things through youth committees and different things like that. I think about the GLAMD event we only went to recently. I think we would all feel more comfortable if there was a register that maybe had more teeth, but I agree with this approach that it should begin as voluntary, see what LGAT ends up with, and then we can have a pathway towards having more accountability around people's credentials to be around people who are vulnerable, which is what a working with vulnerable people card is. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alderman Evans. Alderman von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question rather than a statement. In the Alderman Issues Resolution procedure, it refers to a respectful conduct officer. Will that position be a paid position?
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor. Alderman von Berto, that is the expectation, that it would need to be someone who has some suitable qualifications, and we'd expect to pay for those services.
I have a further question. If that is the case, what sort of process will be undertaken to select that person?
The usual process that I would envisage, Alderman von Berto, is that we would set some criteria for that sort of appointment, make some approaches to various people, and then bring a selection of nominees back to council for a final decision.
Back to council?
Yeah, what the General Manager just said, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that the council would appoint a panel that could be called upon should it be necessary.
That's not what I heard, but okay.
Well, it could be one. Sorry, just to clarify, it could be one or a number of people. It would. I think the point that underpins this, is certainly from my perspective, Alderman von Berto, is that the person who's appointed, it's the Alderman's issues resolution procedure. Alderman should make that selection, not the General Manager or someone external to the organisation. It should be a person chosen by Council to assist them if issues do arise.
In other words, if I can clarify another point, it would be on a retainer basis in the event that something occurred. Alderman von Berto, did you have any other questions or comments?
Not at this point in time, thank you.
Thank you. In that case, right a reply, Alderman Walker.
I thank all my colleagues that have had input either in the role of chair or all of us around the table. I think that shows an interest in this matter, and that's to be commended. I'd like to think I have libertarian inclinations, but still believe in seat belts, speed limits, and not smoking when I fill my car up at the petrol station. The whole point with this is voluntary. I love voluntary voting. This is a voluntary amendment that I've made that people can choose to do or not do. It is a pragmatic workaround to the situation we find ourselves where we can't just say, do this. Alderman Warren, Mr Mayor, did ask a question around the employee or volunteer status. I've been silent on that to hedge because the situation is I've brought something forward that is voluntary in nature, but depending on what happens as we go along, it might well be that the Director of Local Government says this is something that's going to be a requirement, and then it would be an employee thing. So I'd hedge around that, and we'll see over time whether, I guess, from their advice, whether, again, what status, whether either's acceptable or whether it becomes mandatory that it's something that's provided as part of council with an employee side of things. So I also note some of the comments that Alderman Mulder made around the reasonable person test. Had that been suggested as an amendment, I would have accepted it. I think it was a pretty fair point to make, and I would encourage contemplation of that when this document is apparently going to be reviewed in 3 or 4 months' time. I think that some good points have been raised. In another set of circumstances, we would have perhaps refined a little on that, but the next council does have that ability. As we talked about before, this isn't a ceiling, it's a floor, it's a starting document, and there's nothing to stop a council amending it as it goes along. And I seek people's support.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is the officer's recommendation plus the voluntary register for working with vulnerable people card. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to our new emergency item 8.4.4, the waste service credit. Alderman Chong. Do I have a second of this? Thank you, Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess as one of the probably very few people in this council who don't get their waste collected by council, it struck me as a really good thing to support, authorising a credit for those that do.
Non-conflict.
Absolutely, I do not have a conflict because I don't get any of my waste collected by council. Look, I think we are all aware of the situation that's happened over the last few weeks and the ramifications of it, and we don't need to go into that at this point. Suffice it to say, the combination of a change of provider and COVID impacting on a number of drivers has left us in a situation where we haven't been able to collect rubbish for both the green waste and the recycling over a period of time. What this recommendation does, what this motion does, is authorising the General Manager or their delegate, the Chief Financial Officer, to credit property owners for the impact that this lack of collecting their rubbish has had. It makes great sense, and certainly if you listen to some of the comments that have come out from the ratepayers, they will certainly be happy with this because they feel that they haven't been receiving the service that they've paid for. And whilst we have allowed people to go to Mornington Waste Transfer Station and drop off things, for many people that's just not been practical. They don't have access to a ute or whatever vehicle to take rubbish to the tip. So for many people, this isn't the most practical solution. There's a range of things embedded in that about how we credit people and all those kind of things, but the essence is that we create a refund for people for the service we haven't been able to deliver. I hope all my colleagues will support a very sensible resolution.
Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you, and in a kind of weird way, I guess I don't have a conflict of interest as well because I don't pay rates as a renter. So, but obviously this is a far more serious issue than that comment. You know, like I talk to a lot of people around, I'm sure it's not unique in that sense, talking to a lot of people who live in this city, and they are very frustrated, and I'm frustrated. You know, like my bins weren't collected. You know, like I didn't know what my pathway forward was, and I think the way that things have gone is about as good as we could have done. But it doesn't mean that people shouldn't feel frustrated. And look, I think you know, when people find out the context of why it's not happening, and which is obviously detailed in the report and in all the council's communications, that level of anger comes down a little bit more. You know, when they're told that Mornington is an option for green waste and recycling, the anger comes down a little bit more, albeit with some who don't have access to that, and that's still very frustrating for them. I think this rebate takes a little bit more of the pressure off. So it's not to say that this isn't an incredibly frustrating time, or has been at least the last week or so for people who live here, but when you're presented with like a pretty crappy set of circumstances around the circumstances that contractors found themselves in around rubbish collection. Look, we're trying to do all we can. And as this emergency motion shows, when the people might have ideas, and whether they come from councillors or the public, we can be nimble enough to think about how we can soften the blow even more. So, you know, I congratulate everyone for what they've pulled together under extreme duress. But also tempering that with the fact that there are still a lot of frustrated people who either don't have a car or can't find a way to get their stuff to the tip, and as I say, sharing that frustration. And the only other comment I make is that, you know, like, when everyone talks about councils, and you know, in the next few months there's going to be so much of the phrase roads, rates and rubbish. If it's that fundamental service to our operations, you know, the debate probably should be had is that shouldn't it be under our actual umbrella rather than contracted out?
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds. Other speakers? Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You don't realise how well a service is operating until it's disrupted. And I do feel for our officers who've pulled out every single stop to try and prevent this happening, and I'm sure there have been a few sleepless nights there. And I think if we were unable to deliver a service that people have paid for, then it's just fair that we reimburse people for that amount. So I fully endorse this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Bloming.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I haven't seen an issue like this ignite the community quite like it has over the last couple of weeks. You know, Alderman Edmonds is quite correct. The level of frustration out there has been quite extraordinary. I think it's fair to say that over the past 3 weeks, 90% of the telephone calls, emails or interactions I've had with community members has been frustration around this issue. And you know, I can say that ordinarily comms has been good. I haven't received a letter yet. My neighbours haven't received a letter yet. You know, I'm able to talk to them, which is good, but I'm not knocking on everyone's door in the city to tell them what's going on. Not everyone has access to Facebook pages, etc. And as I say, our comms are usually right on the money, but I think we've dropped the ball on this occasion here. And you know, some of the frustration could have been averted, and it is once you explain what's actually occurred. But for some of my more elderly residents, it's not possible to go to Mornington. Unfortunately, I've got a trailer. I can grab a couple of their bins and take them out. That's fine. But again, I'm not able to do it for the whole city. And so I just suggest that in any comments that we send out, hopefully tomorrow to the Mercury and other communication channels, we make quite clear exactly what the options are available to our residents, because there's a lot of people out there that just aren't aware of what's happening. And you can still see the bins sitting on the streets, the recycling bins. There's still some green bins sitting on the street. Again, I think we need to be on the front foot. I take it that read the report, people have written to. I can tell you I haven't. I know a lot of my neighbours haven't either. They haven't received that communication. It is very appropriate, of course, where we've landed here. This is far from ideal. We all agree with that. If we can now communicate exactly, people would rather be paying for their service, absolutely. But this is the best outcome. We've been dealt a pretty bad blow here. I take Alderman Warren's point. It has been running smoothly for so long. They've now got this disruption. My sincere hope is that we work with the new providers when they come fully on board, and we ensure that we get back to regular servicing of our waste and recycling.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Other speakers, Alderman Mulder.
Mayor, if ever we needed a reminder, and Alderman Bromley is absolutely correct, in the years that I've been on council, you never quite see issues ignite the way that this particular one has, and so it should. Roads, rates and rubbish. Don't fix the potholes throughout the entire city for a year and see what happens. Don't pick up the rubbish for a week and see what happens, because that is what they see our job to be, and it's a good focus to us on what the core services are. I do say, like the recycling, and was due to be picked up in Howrah South last Thursday. Today is Monday, and the street is still littered with bins. And I must say that my bin was put out on the Thursday night and wasn't pulled in until the weekend because I hadn't received a letter. I hadn't been advised, and I didn't, and I wasn't aware that it wasn't going to be collected, because at that stage it was leave it out there, we're going to be late, and it took some time to do it. So, but how you get that message out there, of course, that's a different thing. But having done that, yes, the point is that lots of people don't have the thing, and tomorrow I hope the people at the waste station won't get too upset when my ute turns up with not one recycling and green waste bin, but all those of the neighbourhood, because I'm surrounded where I am with a fair few elderly people who don't have a car, let alone a ute or a trailer. So, I would suggest that there may be one or two good Samaritans out there who might be able to collectively do. As Abraham Lincoln said, a government should never do for the people what the people can do for themselves. So I fully support this. The other issue that crops up is here we are, charging, rates. And I'm just wondering about the green bin, the green waste issue. Whether that should have always, for time immemorial, been, if you deliver it to the waste station, you shouldn't be charged for that, because they turn it into a very profitable little enterprise when they mulch it and turn it into things. So why should they not at least take it for free at the gate all the time, rather than do it? And I might note that only about 30% of the people, I think from memory, actually use the green waste bin, and there are lots of other people who actually pay a contractor with a skip bin or a trash pack. Yes, I was thinking of the name. They're actually a wool pack. You reuse a wool pack, and they put them in there, and they pay for it themselves anyway. So, but I do laud this. I think I may have been the one that raised the question about saying, well, it's unethical to be, it's unethical, it's inappropriate to be charging for a service that you're not delivering, and I think this is the most appropriate way around it. Sure, it comes at a bit of a cost to us because there are sunk costs in these things which are paid for, but which are required. But be that as it may, if you promise a service and you don't deliver it, then you should refund the money as you would any other service or item on display. So I would recommend, I support this motion, and I think it's a very good motion to have before us.
Other speakers, Alderman James?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I spent 2 hours on Sunday actually touring around the city and noticed in particular in Risdon Vale, in Cobar Road and Spinifex, that the recycling bins are overflowing and there's rubbish on the footpaths and so on. And that's just on the basis of selecting a few streets. This is a major concern. And it's a major concern because we are basically paying lip service to a matter that we should have actually foreseen as part of when they changed from one contractor to the other. It's my understanding that the current contractor has in place a contract to probably early in October or thereabouts. That's my understanding. So why hasn't the contractor delivered? And why are we now taking a back step and deciding that we are going to use council cash-backed waste reserve to pay for those residents who, through no fault of their own, have now been unable to have their recycled waste collected by the current contractor? It just seems ironical that in the associated report that it says, and I quote, "Council's waste contractor contacted council officers advising that due to illness because of COVID-19 driver availability was becoming problematic." And also in report in detail, council's waste collection contractor has experienced a significant impact of illness in all divisions of the business. Now, why haven't we been advised about this before it actually happened? We, at the last minute, have been approached and presented with a report from the General Manager that the credit property owners directly impacted by the pause in green waste recycling that occurred between the 15th of July to the 31st of July, that a pro rata amount of waste charges defined in Council's rating resolution be approved. Why do we have to put on a sort of band-aid approach to this when we can actually tap into our cash-back waste reserve to actually hire some private or external contractors to go out and pick up these bins? Now, I thought that would have been appropriate rather than spend $90,000 on giving a rebate to those people in the community who will have overfilled bins. They will have their recycling bins still left out. In Lindisfarne, we put them out Monday night. There's a chock-a-block down Gordons Hill Road and they're overfilled and people haven't taken them in. I have. But the fact of the matter is it's this particular service that's going to be provided to the people in Lindisfarne, Geilston Bay, Risdon Vale will not be picked up, or these bins will not be picked up to sometime early August. And by giving a rebate of $90,000 for those persons who have been adversely affected or impacted by the pause in green waste and recycling, that's not going to do anything for their face of mind in the spirit of council. The buck stops with us, the elected representatives. And you can talk about COVID coming into play on this, but there is a more important point that needs to be considered in this instance, and that is, does the existing contractor have a contract until a certain time in October, or has that been revoked, and therefore the new contractor who has been, appointed by this council, have they come in to fill the gap because of the need for one contractor, etc.? I don't know the answer to that. But I find it, Mr Mayor, very unfortunate that in the circumstances the officer's report has come out and said that the council's waste contractor contacted council advising that due to illness because of COVID-19 driver availability, it was becoming problematic. I will not support this because I believe it does nothing for council to actually avail itself of external contractors to hire them and use some of the money within our cashback waste reserve to hire external contractors to come in and pick up those recycling bins and take them to the tip up at Mornington, because at the moment there is no charge for anybody to take their recycling bin to the Mornington Waste Management Centre. I think this is not the way to go. Instead, let's have action.
Thank you. Alderman James, I do need to, and I'll do this as chair, first of all acknowledge that it is a highly unsatisfactory situation this council in, and you've got a right to express that concern about how we got here. But there are some facts that I think we really need to clarify to ensure that the public listening tonight are aware of the actual situation. The first is that the original contractor is out of contract. A new contractor has been negotiated, and the transition was being managed very, very smoothly with collaboration from both sides. The only reason that that transition plan has failed is because of a very strong impact of COVID on the driver fleet. Now that sits right across, that's the first fact I wanted to clear up. The second fact is I wanted to clear up is there are simply no quick replacements. There's no one outside that we can go to. We've actually enjoying some support from Hobart City Council from their capacity to contribute to helping us to solve the problem, but there is no one else to go to. Our staff have been very busy trying to do exactly that, but there's no providers to take that task on. Thirdly, I want to emphasise the fact that both the outgoing contractor and the new contractor have exercised a lot of goodwill, and they are collaborating very closely with council to minimise the impact on the citizens. So this council has been doing everything it can to manage its way through this very difficult situation. I just need to clarify some of the points there. Other speakers, I think, Alderman Walker, thanks.
Look, it's a really tangible, visible form of frustration when something basic isn't occurring, and we're all aware of that. For what it's worth, 3 weeks ago, I zoomed in from an airport hotel in Sydney because it would be one of 4 flight cancellations that kept me there for 2 nights, which means that the Walker household now has 5 weeks of recycling backed up. I want to point out that with the cards that we've been dealt, and it's as I said, it's largely a COVID-related thing that has pushed this over the edge. We are being on the front foot. We haven't been shamed or jawboned into this reimbursement. This is something that we've acknowledged from the get-go is something we should be doing. They're challenging times. None of us like it, but realistically, this is what, with the free waste depositing, which doesn't meet everybody's needs, and the reimbursement, which doesn't meet everybody's needs. There isn't a lot of powder and shot when there's no other available mechanisms at hand. So we'll treat this as a learning experience, as well as acknowledging that the waste sector and other areas are experiencing some profound challenges in the current climate. So I ask what would be achieved in not supporting this motion. What will be achieved won't be the spontaneous collection of recycling. All that will be achieved is that households won't get the reimbursement that I think is the minimum that we can do, is acknowledging the inconvenience that's been caused. So I just don't understand why someone wouldn't support this motion.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Other speakers? Alderman Von-Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I can't support the total recommendation. I can support the recycling services, the reimbursement, but not the green waste. The situation is that at this time of year, there's limited green waste. Also, green waste is collected monthly, rather than fortnightly. As we heard from Alderman James and also Alderman Walker, there seems to be the issue of overflow as far as recycling is concerned, and that it is causing problems for many people in the community, and particularly those people who can't take their excess to the waste transfer station. I'd be supportive of the approximate 52,000 in relation to recycling, but not the approximate 90,000, and we don't even know that it's 90,000, it could be more than that. I can't support that. I don't think that is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Vomberto. Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And look, I think we all recognise the level of frustration that's been in the community about this. Everybody is frustrated. Anywhere you drive around, you see bins and rubbish on the side of the road. But it's not something anybody could have foreseen. If the contractors could have worked out how many people were going to get sick, we wouldn't be in this situation. But realistically, they don't know how many drivers are going to go down with COVID or other illness. Of course they don't. And it's a very specialised job. It isn't something that we could just rope somebody in off the street and say, well, go and drive a rubbish truck and pick up the rubbish. You know, you need training. You could do a lot of damage with those trucks if you're not trained properly to use them. And yes, we have been using, as the Mayor said, we've been using other vehicles. Our staff have been working hard to get this done as best they can. And we expect services to be back as normal from the 1st of August. But I think we all recognise that a number of our ratepayers have been disadvantaged. They've paid for a service, whether it's the green waste or the recycling, that we for all sorts of reasons, have not been able to provide. This motion here gives the capacity to the General Manager to at least rebate those costs. No, it's not perfect, but at least it's a measure of recognition that people have suffered because we weren't able to collect their rubbish. I seek council support.
Thank you. I will read the motion out, given that it's come onto the agenda very quickly and the members of the public watching this haven't had an opportunity to see it in the agenda. So the recommendation is that Council authorises the General Manager and their delegate, the Chief Financial Officer, to credit property owners directly impacted by the pause in green waste and recycling service that occurred between 15th of July and the 31st of July. The pro rata amount of the waste charge as defined in Council's rating resolution approved in June 22. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. And I move on to item 9.1, notice of motion, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the motion standing in my name.
Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman James. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is the second time I've brought this in, and I was planning to leave it until the next council, but your remarks the other evening persuaded me that this maybe we should do so. And your remarks, Mr Mayor, related around the fact that you've been approached by the Mayor of Darwin, who was busily gloating that they had got rid of the title Alderman, and that Darwin members of Darwin Council are now called councillors, and that that left only Clarence and Glenorchy in the whole of Australia who still use this ancient title. The City of Sydney, which I suppose was our first major settlement in this country, and I think has claimed to be the premier city, although those south of the border may not agree so much, but they got rid of the title 30 years ago, and here we are still clinging to it. We claim to be a progressive council, and in many ways we are a progressive council. Some of the votes that have come across this chamber are quite progressive. We're certainly not, as a council, that's stuck in the past all the time, so in that sense we are moving with our times and with our constituency. And a progressive council shouldn't cling to these outdated titles because it simply sends the wrong message. The government says it will legislate, but I don't think we should be forced into out of the 17th century. I think we should see the writing on the wall, take the lead, move with the times, and declare ourselves to be councillors. The current law says that persons elected to a city, as we are councillors. That's what we are. But we may be referred to as aldermen. It doesn't say who chooses, and may isn't must. So the provision's there. Now, but I mean, there is not much to say, much more. But I think we should keep in touch with it, and those aldermen who wish to cling to that particular tag are more than entitled to do so until such time as the law changes. But in the meantime, I think by the letter of the law, I think it's about time now that this council says, yes, as a collective, we are councillors as required by the Act, and we may be known as councillors, but collectively we choose not to be, though individuals may maintain that right if they so desire. So, Mr Mayor, with that, I commend the motion to the floor.
Thank you, Honourable Judge.
It's very interesting, Mr Mayor, because it seems to be going right back to where I started in 1984 when we were a councillor, and I was one of 3 elected to the Lindisfarne ward, and I was a councillor, Clarence councillor in the Lindisfarne ward, along with Michael Redette, Marshall Mackay and myself. And when it was proclaimed a city, and Robin Gray, I think, made a lot about this when he actually initiated in the Parliament that Clarence should become a city. And at that time we were sort of elevated in that sense because we became a city, we had strength, we had a lot of attributes that other councils didn't have. We had a population, and we basically had worked through when the bridge was knocked down as being an independent place and had to rely a lot upon our own goodwill and so on. So the fact of the matter is that when we became a city, we took it as being a really important event, and I enjoyed being sort of elevated in a sense from a councillor to an alderman because of the city, because we came together as one. We elected a mayor, we elected a deputy mayor not long after that, and also too it was a vote across the city, not from wards and so on. So look, this particular motion is saying, and it is quite clear, that an elected member of the Clarence City Council shall be known as councillor. Now, I don't like the word shall. I don't think it's appropriate, and therefore I think that as I obviously intend to seek re-election in October, and if I'm going to have on my brochure re-elect Alderman, re-elect Richard James Alderman and whatever, then in fact that is how I will canvass myself, and I have every right to do that. If I'm going to stick to what it was determined back in 88, I think it was, then I believe that until such time as it's changed, and that may happen, and I've got no problems with that, if it's changed by an Act of Parliament, then okay, well and truly, you abide by that. But until such time as that, I believe that I have fulfilled my role in this place over 35 years as being called an alderman. And therefore, I will obviously not support this motion because it's got the word shall in it. And even though I know, Mr Mayor, that I can continue to use the word alderman, it's not binding on me until such time as the Act is changed. So if there had been a change to the word shall, then of course I would have obviously been fairly supportive of that.
I accept that amendment, Mr Mayor.
Look, look, I'll come back to that, but Alderman James, please continue.
Oh yes, well, I am heartened, Mr Mayor, by a comment from my colleague that if he is considering changing it...
Are you asking him to make that amendment?
Well, I most certainly would seek through your chair...
To change the word shall to what?
To may.
May. Alderman Mulder, are you prepared to entertain that change?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
The seconder of the motion?
Is the one who...
Is the one who's proposed it.
Very astute, thank you.
I've said enough.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, well, so the motion's now may be known as councillor? Okay. I take it, Alderman James, you've finished now?
Finished, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Here we are in Clarence in 2022 with two men arguing about whether we or not we should use a gendered anachronistic term to describe ourselves. I supported Alderman Mulder's motion 3 or 4 years ago, I think, and I was surprised that the majority of my colleagues did not. I'm just looking at the boards on the wall behind the Mayor's table here, which shows photos of all the councillors or aldermen since 1973. I can see very few women there, and there are currently 4 women on Clarence Council, despite the fact that 51.3% of Clarence residents identify as female. I suspect if there were more women on council, this would have been done years ago. I do support the motion. I find it very uncomfortable to use a gendered term that does not apply to me, and I look forward to being a councillor going forward.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. A minute, please. Alderman Newington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, when I talked about some of the things that have led to frustration, conflict, debate, angst and conflict between us all, I didn't specifically mention motions on notice, but I feel compelled to do so right now. To be honest, I'd say that 50% of some of the ones that have come in front of us either meet one or more of these criteria, which are attempts at virtue signalling, blatant politicking and media attention grabbing, or media profile. They could have been done through other means, such as workshops.
Mayor, can I ask that Alderman Newington addresses the motion, please?
Alderman Newington, it's not appropriate to cast aspersions on the intentions or motivations behind people making a notice of motion. It is relevant to talk to the motion in particular, and I do uphold Alderman Warren's point of order.
Okay, well, the next point was, some of these things can be done through other means, such as workshops, internal discussions, questions on notice, aldermen's requests, or are things that are already being addressed in another way or another form, or are about to be changed through another mechanism. And certainly that's the case on this one. LGAT's undergoing a review of the Local Government Act, and I'd expect that that's going to happen now. And then the other thing is that sometimes, we waste time on issues that are not council responsibility. So I'm trying to make a generalisation about motions on notice in general, Mr Mayor, but this one is one of those. It's wasting our time. It's going to be dealt with very soon. I probably agree with it. there's no point us being aldermen or everyone else as councillors, but it's premature. It's going to happen anyway. The next council will probably print the alderman's cards with councillor on it, I would expect, if they were smart. And we just let it happen. So, no, I'm not going to support this one. And to be honest, the other two motions that are upcoming all fit one or more of those categories, and I'll be voting no to them as well.
Oh, jeez. Alderman Evans, I think, was next, and then Alderman Blomley.
He who is without sin on getting a motion on notice in the newspaper, please throw the first stone. I think...
Give me a stone.
I would also uphold Alderman Warren's motion and ask all aldermen to talk to the subject rather than have a shot at the person making it or other speakers.
Fair enough. I think that argument about LGAT and the local government review is an interesting one. It was used last time we discussed this, but if we just do it, it's one less thing LGAT's trying to force through the cylinder. You know, we had this motion whenever it was, like 4 years ago, supported it, obviously. People know who you are when you're a councillor. Alderman, you can just hear the awkwardness when people call you one, I think. But, you know, you use the title because that's what we are, but, you know, I think it would be, for a contemporary council moving forward, it would make a hell of a lot of sense to move to councillor, which is why I supported it last time. But obviously we didn't get it through. But it's not the first time on this council we've had a second bite of the apple on something like that. We've had a vacant flagpole that we revisited within 3 weeks that we addressed that issue. Our climate attitude towards climate change changed a lot with the second motion. So there's no harm, and there's certainly no harm in changing your mind, whether you're a person or an organisation. And I do pick up the comment of Alderman Ewington before that I actually have kicked the tyres on a motion like this a few years ago, and the exact lens I thought it should probably come through would be a new council, because that's when you've got to do the printing of the new stationery, you've got to set up the new email addresses, you've got to you've got to basically have a complete overhaul of the comms because there will be turnover. And even little things like our email addresses, how hard are they to give over the phone because they've got this little ALD_, and then, you know, I just think it's a clear opportunity to endorse this motion before we have a new council. And honestly, it's probably a cost-saving measure as well. So it absolutely has my support. It did then, it does now. And I urge people to support it.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'd just like to preface my comments by saying that there are some Hobart City Council elected members who also use the term alderman. It's not just us in Glenorchy, it's also some in the Hobart City Council chamber as well. But you're right, here we are, Mr Mayor, you know, in July 2022. And it would seem, if someone was to look at our motions, I noticed tonight that the most pressing issue facing this city was what we call ourselves. I mean, seriously. We discussed earlier tonight the rebate for green waste and recycling services and what's occurred there. And I made the point that 90% of my recent calls, council-related, have been about that issue. But I gave some thought tonight to other issues, and the higher order issues that are important to Clarence ratepayers. Number one, cost of living pressures. It's about what it costs you at the grocery store in your shopping trolley. And let me tell you, that is increasing.
Mayor, can you ask Alderman Blomley to address the motion, please?
Look, I could see that he probably is in an oblique way, but if you're able to clarify that, Alderman Blomley, and keep it...
Mr Mayor, I will. And I must say also, Mr Mayor, I'm quite concerned with interruptions from some colleagues. I think they're out of line as well, Mr Mayor. I'm allowed to talk to this debate. It's a motion on notice. It's not a planning item.
Alderman Blomley, all councillors or aldermen are entitled to put their hand up and make a representation for a point of order.
I get that.
Now, I've accepted that that's the case. I vote in your favour on this instance, but I have expressed an interest in how this is going to come to focus. Thank you.
It's not just cost of groceries, it's cost of petrol, it's cost of rates. Nearly a 5% increase in rates. They're the issues, Mr Mayor, that ratepayers are talking to me about. They're the issues that they're wanting us to address. They're the issues they want to be debated in this chamber, because that will actually deliver what they pay us and they elect us to do. Mr Mayor, here we are, yet again, talking about ourselves. From my perspective, Mr Mayor, there are more serious, higher order issues to be talking about. We should be getting back to basics. We should be getting back to doing what we've been elected to do. And Mr Mayor, Alderman Evans raised a very good point a moment ago. Very good point. In 3 months' time, there'll be a new council. Let them decide what we're going to do. Surely that's the way to go about it. There's a cost involved. Not only staff time, but there is significant cost involved with printing of cards and all the rest of it. Now, for the record, I'm actually, if we decide to go to councillor statewide, so be it. Unlike some, Mr Mayor, I don't put much store in a title. I'm here to work for the people of Clarence, whether that's as an alderman or as a councillor, That's what I've been elected to do, and that's what I'll continue to do. I won't be supporting this motion tonight, Mr Mayor. I will, however, welcome a discussion with the new council, if I'm fortunate enough to be here, Mr Mayor, in the new council, to then look at it as we start a new term together. This sort of stuff, from my perspective, Mr Mayor, is, as I said, not higher order material or priority at all, and I think it has the potential to be quite unnecessarily divisive. Let's just get on and work together. Let's go to this next council election. Whoever is here in this chamber in 3 months' time should then determine their future.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley.
Just quickly, I didn't want to interrupt after what happened, but my comments were that we should do it now, not the next council, just to clarify that.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Now, I'm not going to take up any more time talking about ourselves because we've, as Alderman Bromley alluded to earlier, we've done way too much of that tonight. I find it actually quite embarrassing. Let's save this issue. Let's save the next council for having to go through the same process. Let's do it now. If someone asks me what I do, I say one of my roles, I'm a councillor. That's what I say. It's as simple as that. So I will be supporting this. Let's just get on with it and stop talking about ourselves.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman Walker?
Yes, somewhat timidly. What I would say is a couple of points. When it was first raised at LGAT, I wasn't in favour of a change. In the same way that when this decent place was suddenly had the word city interjected it, I wouldn't have supported that if I had the chance. I think that it's an unnecessary element there, as was the change to alderman. But all the bits of paper, all the policies and procedures, henceforth changed to have that there, and that was, my main feeling of, well, just leave it be. Once the changes came in, then we needed to get on board with them, which is why I supported the motion Alderman Mulder tabled a few years ago. For what it's worth, it's not self-interest because they're 600 character statements that my colleagues have been alluding to as part of what they're doing very soon. The word councillor has, 2 more characters than alderman, so that's something to bear in mind. And just very carefully, be careful of the word progressive. Progressivism is something that really found its place under the awful administration of Woodrow Wilson, the worst president of the US ever. So, as such, no, ever. And as such, I am supporting this, but yeah, I'm cutting it down and finishing my speaking now because it is not good timing to be dealing with this motion given some of the challenges that we've been experiencing in this city over the last few weeks.
Other speakers? Alderman Bonberto?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My understanding is that at the moment the motion has been changed to that for the purposes of section 25(2) of the Local Government Act 1993, an elected member of the Clarence City Council may be known as a councillor. I'd ask Alderman Mulder if we can have a further change so that we actually reflect what is in section 25(2) of the Local Government Act at this very moment. And that is that for the purposes of section 25(2) of the Local Government Act 1993, an elected member of the Clarence City Council may be known as a councillor or an alderman. Thank you.
Okay. There being right of reply time, I think, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. All I can say is that I take Alderman von Berto's point, but that is a point that the reason it doesn't need an amendment because that's what the Act says now. The point that we're trying to make here is that the word may be known as a councillor and the Act is silent on who makes that call. And as such, it can be assumed that it will be the individual. So I have no dramas with those councillors in Hobart who choose to continue on and refer to themselves as aldermen. I'd also point out that if it really didn't matter to them so much, you wonder why they've set up a special Facebook page for retain the word alderman. So I mean that's their call, and that's what the law allows. The reason I've brought this in is to hasten to use the swear word that the Conservatives hate so much, that is progressive. It is moving forward. That is what the word progress means, irrespective of who may have used it in the past, and I'm sure plenty have. So, you know, I think there's much to do about, there's a lot to do about nothing, but I just think that when we and Glenorchy and a few in Hobart cling to this outdated terms, and we're unique in the country. They don't even use this term in England, so please support the motion and let's get on with it. And the change to the word from shall to may is that it's a moot point. Mr Mayor, if this motion, should this motion succeed from now on, you may refer to us collectively as councillors, and you may also, at your own discretion, if you can be mindful of those aldermen who wish to be called aldermen, that's fine. But when you're collectively addressing us, you are now at liberty to use the word councillors when you call us collectively.
So the motion before the Chair is as put forward by Alderman Mulder with the word shall change to may. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. So that I may continually respectfully refer to my colleagues, can you let me know whether you prefer to be known as a councillor or an alderman, please? However, I will,
think you can take
when
the vote
referring
from
to us collectively, now use the term councillors. Thank you. Moving forward to 9.2, notice of motion, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In accordance with notice given, I move that as Council has strengthened its corroboration with specialised services such as Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul and the Housing Connect to best respond to people experiencing homelessness in Clarence, therefore explores the opportunity for further support services by way of accommodation for the homeless in the vacant golf club building at Rosny Park, and for the duration of the winter months of 2022, and then an ongoing arrangement for the use of the building determined by Council following the conclusion of the City Heart consultation process.
Do I have a seconder? Alderman Mulder, thank you.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Yep. Thank you, Mr Mayor. From time to time, people put forward proposals, ideas, and I think any idea that deserves merit ought to be at least considered as part of what the Clarence City Council can do in the way of assisting with those persons experiencing homelessness in Clarence. We are all aware, I think, of the small tent city in Kangaroo Bay, which has been in that car park now for a few months. And during that time, there has been that perhaps determination from Clarence residents to say, why is that happening within the City of Clarence? And what are the authorities doing in relation to assist them? Also, there are people that are living in tents adjacent to the bowling centre there in Rosny, and there are other people up in the quarry area in the park adjacent to Lenina Road. And so there are small groups within the city. Council has also entered into an arrangement in a partnership with specialised services such as Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, the Housing Connect to best response. And we have arrangements with them to foster this particular process. The other fact of the matter is that I believe it's appropriate that the Clarence City Council has an opportunity to activate and do something. The golf club building is empty. It's in a state of which there is a possibility for which there is a need that Council can assist in those services. I think that we really need to be seen to be proactive and offer the building, but under the supervision of one of those organisations such as the Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, Housing Connect and so on. It is very interesting to see have we still got a quorum in here.
We do, Alderman James. I'm keeping a very close eye on that, so don't get distracted.
That's very kind of you, Mr Mayor, and I think it's very interesting to see why, in fact, at this stage, some of my colleagues have left the chamber when, in fact, this is something I believe is really
Alderman James, please.
But having said that, I think that surely we can call upon the special services of the Salvation Army St Vincent de Paul to try to work with Clarence to at least have a pocket of people who have currently experienced homelessness in the city, to really take them on board and actually utilise the building at Rosny Park, the old vacant golf club building, and provide some assistance. It's only, I see, as part of the duration of the winter months, 2022, and any ongoing arrangement of that building obviously will need to be determined by Council following the conclusion of the City Heart consultation process.
Thank you. Councillor Mulder.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll avoid using the word worship because I believe that's even more antiquated than Alderman. Mr Mayor, this is a very laudable motion and I see where it's coming from. But one of the issues that I have, of course, and that's as pointed out in the General Manager's comments, is that the golf club itself per se is unsuited and not fit for that particular purpose. So should someone else request an amendment, I would support it that we delete reference to the golf club in the actual motion and just go along with the idea of finding any other alternative buildings should the need be there. And then, of course, the first one that crops up, which you'd have trouble finding an argument for, was Alma's, which is basically vacant at the moment and would provide, this sort of open space. But that gets me to my main point with this one, and the difficulty that we have is that at this point in time, the homeless people that you were referring to in the tent city, which used to be on She Oak Point, when it was out of sight and out of mind, and no one seemed to mind. And that was before we all got round here and said, yep, we encourage this sort of thing for homeless people to put tents up on council reserves. I remember us changing the bylaw. So that is what has produced this thing. Now, the homelessness stuff is really good, but you wonder why, when all the work that's going on with the premises at Rokeby where people can doss for the night, that has gaps, why these people aren't using them. And I said at the briefing, have we spoken to those people? I have, and they will tell you. Wally will tell you that that he is he doesn't want the responsibility of a house and a home. He's got alcohol issues and he's got mental health issues, and he would like to try to do something that. And we've arranged for support services to come and see him, but it would just not. That's not what he wants. And it would be counterproductive to put some of these people, force them or put them into these shelters where their behaviour would see them with their behaviour and their substance problems would see them thrown out. And there's a thing about saying that, in a sense, we can support them where they are. That's why we give them tents. That's why we give them sleeping bags. That's why we do those sorts of things. And for those that do want a home, by all means, go into the Clarence and we drag out all the services and support. And I'm all for those sorts of things. But these people have been around for a long, long time. They're not just as a result of the housing crisis. The hobo lifestyle is something that's been with us from time eternity. Many of us who have been around for a while will remember the late Mogsy Triffett, who, was a regular around the place. He caused no problems, but he went to people and he had a routine of shops where he'd go and visit at closing time and get his food, and then he'd go and sleep quite often up in the bush in the Waverley Range and those sorts of things. So, it's a laudable motion, but we're trying to force these people into something they don't want. And I must say that, in the officer's report, they're talking about producing shower facilities at Clarence on the Bay. And it was Wally who told me when I was talking to him about, well, what can we do for you? And it was him that suggested maybe you could open up, because they were sleeping in the forecourt of the golf club at the time. They didn't want the golf club open so they could sleep in there. No, they just wanted access to the showers because, as he pointed out, it was, it's pretty cold doing your ablutions in Kangaroo Bay in the middle of winter. And it was the middle of winter when I came and raised this issue about the shower facility, opening the shower facilities. And I also note that the last in the General Manager's comments, in the meantime, we are developing arrangements for the use of shower facilities at Clarence on the Bay for people sleeping rough in the area. Sorry, that was raised 12 months ago and we're still trying to work out whether we can unlock the keys or not. I think if this is an issue where maybe we should have got on with it and unlocked the keys, and maybe they would then be still sleeping at She-Oak Point rather than around in the Kangaroo Bay side. It's a question of what, this motion does not meet the needs of the people that it's targeted towards. I'll be supporting it only on the basis that that we should always be in the position to occupy our current assets and future assets should that need arise.
Thank you. Alderman Chong and then Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I absolutely support the intent of this motion. I really do. I deal with a lot of people in this space, both service providers and people who are homeless. I can't support the motion as it sits here. And it's really only because it talks about using the golf club buildings, absolutely. And when I talk to the people who work in this space, who deal with the people who are homeless, those buildings are not suitable. There's so many reasons why those buildings are not suitable. What they would love, when I talk to Don McRae from the Salvos would love, is an audit of all of our buildings to be able to say, if we need something in this area, here's what we've got. Here's what Clarence can unlock, and there's toilets there and there's showers there and all of those things. And we don't have that quite at the moment. It's something we're working on, but we don't have it at this stage. So just picking on a building and saying, shove people in there, for me doesn't work. And if we got rid of that reference to the golf club buildings, I would absolutely be supporting this, because it would be great for us to take stock of what we have and work on a way to make facilities available to people as much as we can when they need it.
Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Chong, Deputy Mayor, for those comments, because you've covered off on what I want to say. But just a couple of points. Excuse me. And I thank Councillor? Alderman James for the motion. One point I want to pick up on, though, is that no one's talking about forcing people into shelters. And I do understand that there's a number of people that are okay with how they're living. But I think in my first few months on council, I actually brought up, in question time, questions without notice, the amount of people that I saw living rough in the dunes at 7 Mile Beach. Guess what? Majority of them were women my age. Some had children. No shelter available whatsoever on the Eastern Shore at that stage. So, like Deputy Mayor, excuse me, I do love the idea of identifying spaces, but working with the service providers. Some of you may have joined us with the Salvation Army breakfasts that have been held outside of Blunston near the park there. Quite difficult to get people to come out of the dark and actually identify that that's how they're living, because, as I said, there's no stereotype for those people that are living homeless today. So again, I will listen further to comments from my colleagues and make my decision at the end.
Thank you. Councillor Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just need to clarify, because I have two motions in front of me. I have an alternate which has quite a simple, it's an amendment, and they both have Rosny Golf Club in the title, but which one are we actually talking about?
We're debating the original one from Alderman James, the one from circulated by Alderman Walker
okay.
is...
No, they're both Alderman James.
No, they're
No,
not.
this one's Alderman Walker, the
James
alternate.
Walker.
But you're right to say that in the title it says that, but it's, yeah.
All right. Look, I thank Alderman/Councillor James for bringing this motion. A lot of the issues with it have already been raised. In particular, Councillor Kennedy's comment that I guess we all have, not all of us, some of us have a stereotypical idea of what a homeless person is. Are we saying that women and children and the gentleman that Councillor Mulder mentioned with an alcohol addiction, teenagers who've left home should all have access to this one facility? There are some real problems there. I'm not an expert in this area. It's something I care deeply about. I've been attending forums at Swan Street Church to do with what we can do to address this issue. And I always take advice from the experts, like, as Deputy Mayor mentioned, Don McRae, and the fact that it's often not as simple as just providing a venue. And in fact, we've been advised that it's going to be about 12,000 a week to provide venue, which is not a reason not to do it, but it's just that we do need to take that into account. It's not as simple as opening the door and saying, there you go. That's my concern, I guess. I guess I also have a lingering hope that the golf club rooms will one day be used again as a golf club. But I also have a question for Councillor James to address in his closing remarks, which is how does this motion differ to the one that I asked in questions a few weeks ago, which was documented quite thoroughly in the minutes the following meeting, as to what council is already doing in this space. And there were, I think, 5 pages, courtesy of Mr Toohey, that documented a number of the things that we were doing, including working with the services, looking for locations that could be used. So I think, a lot of that's not seen by the public. They think we're doing nothing because people are still intense. But there is a lot going on in the background. And again, we are working with the people who are the experts in this field and who have those connections and know who the people are and where they are and what they need and are working to support them. I'm not sure that I can support this motion, which doesn't mean I don't care about the issue. I just don't think this is the right solution.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. I'm not sure whether you're a councillor.
I don't mind, Your Worship.
Well, I'll default to councillor if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I really, it's okay. Look, I'm going to come straight to the point on how we can salvage something from this, and as an outcome. And I would urge the mover and the seconder of the motion to keep the entirety of point 1, and from point 2, where it says council explores opportunity for further support services, delete everything from and provide onwards. So it would just read all of point 1 and point 2, council explores opportunities for further support services.
Well, Alderman James, are you happy with that amendment? Sorry, that's not accepted by the mover. That's
fine. And politics, if you like, is the art of the possible, but politics is also about problem solving. And I think that's what I was trying to do, with the hope of perhaps foreshadowing an alternate, but procedurally that's not something I can do. It's unfortunate that...
you are able to propose an amendment which is put to the vote, if that was what you had in mind. In other words, you are able to propose that the motion on the chair be amended as you've suggested, and we get to vote on that if there's a seconder after debating it. That's procedurally an option you have.
Well, I'd certainly try to amend it so that it read that council requests staff develop an options paper to inform and guide councillors' role in addressing homelessness within Clarence.
Okay. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Proposed amendment? I'll
second
take Alderman Mulder.
Yeah. Can I second the amendment as well as the motion?
Okay, so now we are debating the amendment. There's no right of reply on an amendment.
Sorry, Jules just said you can't have someone who's already moved or seconded.
Well, he didn't move or second it. I mean, I see. So Alderman Mulder's out of order in terms of...
I don't think
it needs to be someone else. Thank you, Gil. I think Alderman Chong was prepared to second the amendment.
Yep.
Thank you.
So is this now point 5?
So what we're now doing is debating the amendment. So if the amendment is adopted after a debate, it becomes the principal motion. Just the...
For clarity for the table 1 to 4.
So procedurally it's quite accurate for this to be moved and seconded, for us to debate it as an amendment. If it's adopted, it becomes the main motion. And then we hold another vote afterwards and continue the debate on the new main motion, the amended main motion. So
this is it.
Sorry,
Yes, this one.
Yeah, so this is the procedurally correct way to go about it. So the amendment has been moved by Alderman Walker, seconded by Alderman Chong. Alderman Walker, would you now speak to the amendment?
Again, in the absence of what was proposed previously, the amendment reads that Council requests staff develop an options paper to inform and guide Council's role in addressing homelessness within Clarence. I thank the seconder for their support. And why do we want to do this? Well, what we're after are practical outcomes. We want to understand what is before Council and what it can do in its space. We want to understand, I guess, that you wouldn't call City Mission to come and fix a whole lot of potholes and overflowing stormwater. These sort of entities, as with St Vincent de Paul and as with the Salvation Army, are the people that understand the issue better and have a depth of expertise that we don't have. We have insight, we have understanding, we don't have that level, and these are the people that we need to be engaging with to be making the practical and tangible difference. Also, what's missing from this and would come through an options paper are the learnings from the Safe Space project that was undertaken in Hobart City Council to a fairly high level of success, is my understanding. And I understand that there might be some investigations being done on rolling it out in Glenorchy. We need to be learning what is working well, because if we don't, the risk with the intent of the motion as drafted is that we might be heading toward what isn't working well and things that you see in San Francisco and Los Angeles and other things. Now, again, they're the reasons why we can do this, because it is a serious issue and we have a role to play, but we need to understand what we can do and what we can do best in this space, and not with the best of intentions spend a lot of money potentially making the problem worse. I don't ascribe any bad intent to the original motion that's drafted, but the practicalities around this just won't work. What could work for the golf course site, or while it's sitting empty, may well come out of the options paper. And what you do see successfully, and I have a pretty good insight into what's been done in Melbourne, are those first step cafes, telling people with almost the basics of actually just coming to work at all and then on time and moving forward like that. Maybe that is something that could be done in the interim. But these are something that an options paper will deliver, whereas what the original motion as drafted will deliver is something that is potentially quite unsafe, quite unworkable and very expensive.
Thank you. Alderman Chong, seconding the amendment.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I guess this motion comes back to my discussions with the homeless service providers, that actually information is what they think they want and what would be useful for them to work out how they can work with us to provide the best potential service for the homeless. Making decisions just arbitrarily on a particular piece of property or a particular scenario don't help. What everybody needs is better information to be able to make better decisions.
Thank you. Any other speakers to the amendment? Yes.
Yeah, I've got a procedural question, if I can have your indulgence. Are we now going to vote first off to whether or not we adopt this as the motion, and
Correct.
then have another vote on whether we accept? So it's a two-vote process?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much. Well, I'll contain my comments to that I think, at this stage.
Okay. Any other speakers?
Point of order before I
Sure.
speak, Mr Mayor. If we adopt this amended motion, then that becomes the motion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, correct.
So, in other words, the debate is held now. If this motion, if this amendment is accepted,
it becomes the main motion.
It becomes the main motion, and there will be no further debate.
No, the debate will continue, and those who haven't spoken on the main motion will have an opportunity to do so, except it will be an amended main motion. They are the meeting procedures.
Yeah, all right. We won't go into huge debates about whether the meeting procedures have got that right or whether you've read them right or not. Mr Mayor, I was sort of prepared to support this motion, but the one thing that's missing from it now, which is where with the original one, were the General Manager's comments. And I have a feeling that with these sorts of things, in order to guide us, it might be paid for the General Manager to make some comment about this new motion before we start to make some contributions. So, you know, a little bit of advice before we start shooting off at the hip would be appreciated.
Because it is an amendment, the General Manager's comments are still there, except I could ask him whether he has any more to add to his comments given this amendment. You guys are actually trying to make this very difficult.
Thank you. Always open for advice, Mr Mayor.
Look, Mr Tui's online and he may wish to add some comments, but my view regarding the amendment, and I had the opportunity to talk to Councillor Walker this afternoon, this is a step in a much broader process that we would have wished to take at some point, principally to investigate the feasibility of bringing accommodation options onto the Eastern Shore, because at the moment most of them are concentrated in Hobart CBD, and we know that historically quite a number of homeless people used to travel back to the CBD to obtain accommodation because there wasn't any on the Eastern Shore. So it's a fairly complex issue in terms of support services as well as accommodation and a few other issues, but we would certainly welcome the opportunity to investigate that.
Thank you, General Manager.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And in respect to those comments, I guess we've probably shot ourselves in the foot when we allow them to travel on the ferry for free then. So this motion comes back to, I think now, I would have expected we were doing a lot of this stuff anyway, but that sort of starts to come to the fact is that maybe, you know, we should flag up Alma's, which is suitable compared to the Rosny Golf Course, and on that basis I'm prepared to do it. But I do make the point that for some people, particularly the ones flagged in the original motion, you know, we're offering them something that they don't want, and is unsuited to them at the moment. So, but in terms of the broader housing thing, I thought that in response to Alderman Warren's questions and the answers provided on the public record, we're pretty active in this space already, and as the General Manager said, we were going to do it anyway, but not for the first time in this meeting will I be supporting something we were going to do anyway and bring it on forward.
Thank you. Other speakers? Any other speakers to the amendment? In that case, I will put the amendment as an amendment which will become the main motion, that Council requests staff develop an options paper to inform and guide Council's role in addressing homelessness within Clarence. All those in favour of that amendment? Against? The motion is carried. It now becomes the main amendment, and we can continue the debate, noting the amended motion.
I didn't speak before we had that amendment. Obviously, now that it is the amendment, now that it is the motion, I'll support it, but I didn't, in principally, I just didn't support turning it over. I think procedurally, as a council, we can wait 3 weeks to do things like that, as we've done previously on plenty of other motions. Had some ideas about potentially how we might wordsmith point 2, but that's not where we are anymore. So considering how we're already going at the moment with our comments, I'll just say that there's so much being told why we can't do things in this space, and as policy makers, albeit at a local government level, it's very frustrating. You know, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. Well, what will work? And I think that's where this motion comes from. Is like, well, keep telling us what won't work. We'll try and take matters into our own hands, and that's why, in principle, you have my support, albeit with perhaps some wordsmithing to say that we'd look at all the buildings that are at our disposal rather than single out the golf club, because I think that is not the pathway that we potentially want to see that site going. But you know, I guess you've got to play the hand you're dealt now, and we have the amended motion. Yeah, sure, it's got my support, but it's just another report, really. If we really want to scruff this issue by the throat, which I believe was the intent of the original motion, sometimes putting something through that doesn't quite fit in the round hole at least might get people to approach something differently. We've all seen different quotes about how you can change things on walls in boardrooms plenty of times about, you know, you never get the same result by asking the same questions. And I feel like we're just asking the same question again now. And we'll get the same answers, and will we be back here in a year's time with the same issues? Unfortunately, and it breaks my heart to say it, I think we probably will be, because we're only one council out of 29. But if this is all we got, then I guess so be it. Let's have another report.
Thanks, Councillor Edmonds. Other speakers? I think, Alderman, you get the right to reply. You don't get another speak to this motion. Alderman James, you get the right to reply.
Good try, though. But very briefly.
I'm not sure you're Alderman or a councillor.
You can call me whatever you like, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Ewington.
I don't care. Look, this is a classic exercise in how not to do a motion on notice about something a pretty complex issue. You know, we all want to do better in this space, but to be honest, the only way we're going to improve this space is our only role in this area is in the planning perspective in terms of making more affordable housing available and more types of housing available, and possibly, you know, coming up with, you know, other buildings that we may be able to use in this space. Now, this should have been done not on a motion on notice, but there's a workshop beforehand, so we could actually do it seriously rather than go round and round in circles like we have tonight. It's just silly. You know, we all want the same thing, but look. Yeah, but I just have to make the other comment is, what do all these people do that we're paying money to sort this stuff out? Whether it be the NGOs that are being funded by the federal government, the state government, they've got staff involved. And obviously we've got staff involved as well. You know, they all mean well, we all mean well, but as Alderman Edmonds said, you know, we're going to be sitting in the same place in 12 months' time, and unfortunately I think we are, because it's complex, but yeah, look, we've got to get better at working out policy on this sort of stuff. It's just...
Thank you. Other speakers? Right to reply. Alderman James, thank you.
Yeah, look, the intent was as a result of a vacant building in the city. It's currently in good state of repair. The intent of the motion was to try to identify a building which is vacant, which has the facilities and being able to be used by the homeless under the auspices of those service providers, as I've mentioned in the original motion. And they are currently our specialist services partnership group with the Salvo, St Vincent and Housing Connect. And this particular motion was put up by a number of people in the community who saw that there was a need for council to be proactive in regard to this. The amendment that has been moved and passed by this council is just another effort in a report. Options. What does that mean? It doesn't address the buildings, the vacant buildings. There is also representation regarding Safe Space initiative by the Hobart City Council. It's my understanding they provide a place in the city where people can go in and take shelter at night and in the colder months. This options paper to inform, in my opinion, will go nowhere. It doesn't identify buildings and it doesn't identify what we are specifically going to do. We have an action plan, but it talks about having bar magnets put on the fridge and other paperwork which is distributed to the community. My motion was to get us thinking And okay, there may be other buildings that may be better utilised in relation to this, but that's been squashed now. There is no means by which we can discuss vacant buildings. We talk about an options paper, and that can be anything from advising those service providers to keep in touch with us and inform us of how they're getting along. You've missed an ideal opportunity for an idea to be debated, and it could have been basically with another amendment or a motion or part 5 to say for consideration by council in conjunction with the service providers. That could have been put in there, and therefore we would have had some discussion about vacant buildings that may be used for the purposes of the homeless in Clarence. We've lost that opportunity now. Vacant buildings in Clarence are out of the question because it's no longer been included, and now we have a rather wishy-washy motion which talks about develop an options paper to inform and guide council's role in addressing homelessness within Clarence. We already have an action plan on that. We're doing that already, and this does nothing to improve anything in relation to homelessness and the use of council buildings which are currently vacant.
Thank you, Alderman James. So the motion before us is that council request staff develop an options paper to inform and guide council's role in addressing homelessness within Clarence. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to 9.3, Alderman Walker.
Yeah, I wish to move the motion that's listed in my name.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Alderman Councillor Edmonds.
Look, thank you for that, Mr Mayor, and I acknowledge that indeed the night is getting on. Racist graffiti is repugnant. I don't think it's enough for it to be condemned. We need to be in the business of promptly removing it. Sediments are totally out of step with our community, and they're appalled by some of the stuff that's being tagged around the place. Now, currently each government organisation is largely responsible for dealing with graffiti on their own infrastructure, so response rates are varying radically. TasNetwork's policy seems to be they'll remove highly offensive material, and they certainly try, but the policy now really is that they won't attend to general graffiti on their infrastructure, or even allow council to do so. So you look, there are some, totally, really in bad state substations that have been like that for years and years and years. And whilst we alert infrastructure owners like NBN Co to graffiti, we can't actually get onto it. Simply put, the longer graffiti stays up, the more harm it's doing. And my motion requests the General Manager initiate service level agreements with other government utilities, enabling council to remove graffiti on their infrastructure within Clarence. So that would be organisations such as TasNetworks, TasWater, NBN Co, Metro, maybe Australia Post. And we are best placed to deal with graffiti in our communities. We are more motivated than other government entities to have it removed promptly because we basically live with it in our community and experience it on that daily basis. Not only would that coordinated approach be more timely, it would be much more cost efficient for all affected parties. This is, if you like, I consider a core council business. You've heard me say it before, and I'll keep saying it, that councils and states are laboratories of democracy. The level of jurisdictions that are best able to innovate, try doing new things, and then if they work, they can be adopted by other municipalities elsewhere. And Clarence is well placed to coordinate this trial approach to removing graffiti, and if successful, could be rolled out to those other municipalities. I'm very confident that the relevant state government ministers would want the likes of TasNetworks to work with council to see this happen, and also I believe our community would, having had to endure years of graffiti on infrastructure like those substations from TasNetworks that I mentioned earlier. It might not be popular in elite circles, but I think there is some merit with the broken windows theory. Graffiti attracts more graffiti. Now, I've sort of harped or concentrated on those side of things, but I think when doing so, we should also recognise what we're doing that's positive in this space. And I want to commend the council officers as far as working in the scope of the graffiti prevention solutions that we see, particularly around the art stencil project on the DSG traffic light signal boxes. These have been highly effective, and it would be good to look at other initiatives such as infrastructure, including the sound walls. So just in quick summation, I'll just stress the General Manager's comments that are listed on the motion. That a report can be provided to members following the initial discussions with those relevant utility providers and agencies. This motion is not committing council to anything more than trying to find a way to do things better and more efficiently, and for us to be engaging with those utility providers and with our community around it. So we're looking for service level agreements, we're looking for cost recovery, we're looking what all government levels should be doing, which is doing things more efficiently for less cost. And I believe this is an initiative that would generate that, and I seek your support.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you. Look, this is a good idea. It's a sound motion. It's got the element of cost recovery, so there's not going to impact on our rate base. If someone comes here with a good idea, why not back it? And so I'll keep considering the time of night that it is. Well done. Round of applause, and it has my support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Look, I note the General Manager's comments. A report can be provided to elected members following initial discussions with relevant utility providers and agency. And I would have thought that we should call on a report to do just that, because at the moment the motion is quite specific that council request the General Manager to seek service level agreements with other government utilities enabling council to remove graffiti on their infrastructure within Clarence. So what that is doing is saying we're going to seek to have service level agreements with these other government utilities, and council would then remove the graffiti on their infrastructure. Now, that is the way I read that motion, and it just seems to me that that is not what the intent and what the General Manager has said. Now, if the report was seeking a report on discussion on service level agreements with enabling graffiti on their infrastructure, so on and so forth. But this is basically saying that council to seek these level agreements with other for council to remove graffiti on their infrastructure. Why should we, the ratepayers of Clarence, pay to remove graffiti on their infrastructure? That's their responsibility. Okay, it'd be great if we could come together and perhaps use some of our homeless people who may be better in tune or may be better able to assist with the graffiti works and make the buildings very, very much pleasing to the eye. But this motion is basically locking us in to service agreements and then council and the ratepayers' money to remove graffiti on their infrastructure. Now, how's that? I can't support that, because we need a report, we need to have some discussions before we even go to the extent, Mr Mayor, of deciding on whether or not we should enter into an agreement with them and spend ratepayers' money. Alternatively, there may be a combination of ratepayers' money and utilities' money to remove graffiti on their infrastructure. I cannot support it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The question around this motion, I do sort of, I get where it's coming from, the support and seeking service level agreements, because they are a little bit tardy and they only remove the most offensive, what they consent to the most offensive things. But it's a question of the beautification of the city, it's the appearance of the city. I think I moved a motion once suggesting that council ought to proactively go and paint out graffiti, but it was defeated, and that was the will of the council at that time. What I think we need to note here, and unless things have changed, we're still using volunteers to paint out graffiti.
Through you, Mayor, partially the program is volunteers for certain work that is low risk and paid contractors for other work that is higher risk.
So I'd like to pay some acknowledgement to Mr Milton Moody for the work that he does and the volunteers. And as far as I can see, council basically is supplying the paint with which these things are painted over, and then our volunteers are going in here. Now, I'm not too sure that I think we need to perhaps distinguish in this, and it doesn't need to amend the motion, but we need to distinguish between loading more work onto overworked volunteers compared to maybe making these particular things with the contractors to do them. Because there are other ways too in which I think we can do. A lot of this stuff is on private property, other than utilities. There's all sorts of problematics there about, you know, who's got a right to go and paint someone's fence when they're on a main road. Those issues need to be sorted out. But also I noticed that it's most common, I want to say, in big forms on those new sound barriers that we put up against highways everywhere. And it's always dawned on me that as part of the greening of the city, why don't we cover those things with vines? They'd be infinitely more pleasant in appearance than the stark Berlin walls that they are, and you know, they would once they're covered in vines and creepers, then you know, that opportunity is lost. So I would think that maybe we should explore a lot more opportunities than just responding to it after the event. So I'll support the motion because I think that that some of these agencies, unless you know, that's just beyond their capacity. But good luck entering into service level agreements which require them to spend money that they weren't going to spend anyway.
Other speakers? Alderman Chong? Councillor Chong, I'm sorry.
It's all right. If you get everybody right tonight, we'll be a miracle.
No, she may be known as an alderman.
Look, just very briefly, and I guess to pick up on that idea of cost, it was mentioned that this would be a cost for ratepayers. I think that's the whole idea behind the service level agreements, is that would be at a cost recovery basis. So what it's about is making sure that we facilitate this happening quicker. We could all think of a number of, particularly the Tas Next Work boxes, you know, that have had graffiti on them for a very long time. And I guess what this is about is enabling us to get in there and get those fixed much quicker and remove graffiti that we all find offensive.
Thank you. Final speakers. Right reply, Councillor Walker.
Thanks for the contributions. Again, it's cost recovery. Again, the thought with this, as was spoken, is that we're trying to, if you like, work it as a trial to see how it could go, and all the comfort around the General Manager trying to enter those agreements and coming back to us about how it's going. And this is one of those things that should be absolutely an area where there's synergies and efficiencies in one entity doing it, not multiple ones coming up. And I thank everyone for their consideration.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is as put forward by Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to Alderman's question time. I should make that Councillor's question time. It's going to take a while, isn't it?
Yeah.
No matters on notice. Answers questions from the previous council meeting are in the agenda, so take those as read. Questions without notice. Can I start with Councillor Warren, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I do congratulate you on doing a very good job on remembering who's who. My question is through you to our communications manager, Mr Pask. I wondered if there is some difference in the way that the mail is being received, given the letters that went out regarding the rubbish, because I know I received mine round about Wednesday or Thursday last week, and yet I know people, including Councillor Blomley, who has not yet received his letter, and he lives quite close to me. Would it be anything to do with the junk mail sticker? I know that the envelope is clearly marked Clarence Council to the resident, but it's not addressed mail. Would that have any impact on letters not being delivered?
Mr Pask.
Through you, Mayor, we're talking about two different letters. One letter was a green waste letter that was sent out the previous week that has arrived in letterboxes last week. The latest letter around recycling was only sent on Friday, so should be due in letterboxes in the coming days.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Yes, two questions, Mr Mayor. Firstly, and my question through you to Mr Graham in his capacity as Manager of Asset Management. Mr Graham, a short while ago we received a petition from a number of residents in North Terrace, Lauderdale, regarding and it was a petition regarding the speed limit on 50k. Would you please provide us with an update and as to whether the Department of Transport has agreed or is in discussion with that change and a signposting of 50k per hour?
Through Mr Mayor, this matter will be reported at the next council meeting.
Thank you. Oh, that's okay, thanks. The other one is to do with Mr Taylor of Cremorne has brought our attention to the state of that road, that gravel road, in relation to the state of it and the washout and so on, and I think we've all read that letter. Again, my question, perhaps through you too, Mr Graham, if he's the person who's capable of, not capable, I'm sure he is, but of able to provide some clarification on that. Is that still part of that coastal Cremorne and foreshore survey, and is that embodied in that particular consultation process, or does it stand alone as regard to what action council may take in improving that road and obviously stormwater, actually maintenance or even upgrading of that road to an acceptable standard?
Through Mr Mayor, I don't know the full details of the letter, so I'd like to take that one notice and I'll provide a further update to Alderman.
All right, perhaps Alderman James, you could make sure that Mr Graham gets a copy of the letter so he can answer that.
Indeed, certainly. Thanks.
Thank you. Alderman von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Referring to an earlier planning item tonight, how does Council commence the process to consider decreasing the speed limit in the vicinity of 233 Cambridge Road?
Could you say that question again, please, Alderman von Berto? How does Council, I missed the verb.
How does Council commence the process to consider decreasing the speed limit in the vicinity of 233 Cambridge Road?
Well, in the first instance, I'm not aware of any decision or intention for Council to do that at this stage, but I will ask Mr Graham if he's got any comment there.
Through Mr Mayor, when we receive requests for in concerns of speed limit, our internal traffic working group works through the process of assessing that location in relation to the current standards.
So can that concern come from an alderman or a citizen? Who actually makes that request?
Well, there's many avenues. Motion on notice will certainly do it, and we've had that come up before, Alderman von Berto, you should be aware. But there are many ways to get that on the table.
Thank you. And my second question is there a short or medium term plan to construct a DDA compliant beach access from the toilet ramp at 41 Howrah Road?
Mr Graham, have you got any information on that? It seems the General Manager might be able to answer that one.
Thank you. I can provide an answer to that, Alderman von Berto. That issue, that's the Little Howrah Beach park, I'll call it, that is listed for review as part of a master plan this year. So we intend to pick up the issue of that ramp and access to the beach from a DDA compliance point of view as part of that process.
I'm talking about short-term, Mr General Manager, not long-term. That's long-term.
Short-term.
Is there any short-term?
Short term, there aren't any easy and affordable options for that ramp at this point in time that we're aware of.
Thank you.
Councillor Edmonds. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have one question, sort of follow on from the question just posed by Alderman Von with the upgrade of the East Derwent Highway and the intersections of Sugarloaf Road and Clinton Road, is there any intention that we're aware of for a reduction in the speed limit at those two intersections? It's been raised with me with a number of residents, particularly concerned, and I appreciate at the moment it's there's a lot of work's going on there, but as they try to cross onto either way, and there's cars hurtling down 100 kilometres an hour, it is an accident waiting to happen. I appreciate it's DSG, but are we aware of any consideration to a reduction of speed limits at those 2 points?
Thanks, Alderman Blomley. You might recall that this council passed a motion requesting DSG reduce it to 80. I think that was about 3 years ago.
So where's that at then?
Sorry?
And this is in line, Mr Mayor.
And we did get a reply back from DSG saying no, they're going to keep it at 100. Right. And they gave us, they cited community consultation and expert advice in giving us that advice.
Okay. Well, if I could be provided, please, with a copy of that council decision and documentation.
Certainly.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr Graham, if we could circulate that to all aldermen, please, because it is currently an issue. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I'll put a small issue given some of the bigger ones that we do tonight. The pole holding up the street sign for Cambridge Street in Rokeby is a bit of a leaner and not a lifter, and it's been lying down for quite some time. I'd appreciate it if there could be some investigation done and some action taken to make sure that it can stay up, please.
Sure. I do encourage all councillors to lodge alderman's requests or councillor requests when we have this sort of stuff to come up.
I believe it's been raised before.
Okay. Mr Graham, if we could attend to that, please. Councillor Ewington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to, I've got a quick question for the GM. What is the council, is there a bylaw or a council or a public law that prohibits people putting stickers or posters on council-owned property, such as wheelie bins or rubbish bins, signs, posts and all those sort of things? What is the current status of bylaws or laws?
Probably Mr Toohey might be, or you...
Mr Toohey might be best placed for that.
Mr Toohey?
Through you, Mayor, it is covered under the Litter Act, as well as our public places and permits bylaw.
Okay. Well, second part to my question is I was going for a run the other morning and saw a rather large sticker on the side of a dog waste bin, which was climate action now. Rather, it took up the whole side of the bin. And on there it had a sticker, a little QR code saying click here to buy more. And I went to the website of this organisation, which is made up of, appears to be lots of other organisations around the country, or groups. And on that they had...
a question, please.
The question is, well, what can council do to enforce that if these things start to pop up everywhere? And what can local government do in terms of contacting the organisers of this stuff? I mean, people have a right to make their political views known, but to produce material that says wheelie bin sticker on a website to say buy this and put it somewhere, I think it should be taken up through, what could council do to make sure that we don't have to spend thousands of dollars taking these down on council property, and or make the people that are doing it aware that it's inappropriate to publicise and promote the sticking of stickers on wheelie bins and or other public property.
In the first instance, I'd ask the GM if he could raise it with Elgat, since it's obviously a wider matter than just just this municipal area. But did you?
No, thank you, Mayor. If you can provide that information through to me and to Mr Toohey, we can follow it up and provide a more detailed response first of all, but certainly take it up with other agencies, including the Electoral Commission, if that's possible.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My excuse me, quick question is about parking. So I'm like, is that Mr Graham? Thank you. During the meeting, I lodged the minutes from the recent Bureau of Community Arts Centre meeting where they brought up the fact that since the ferry service has been introduced, there's basically parking to get to the Arts Centre, and anyone that knows, and most of you have been there, that there's workshops happening every day of the week, including weekends. Parking has become impossible. And, you know, there's members ranging in ages, but a number of them in their 80s trying to walk 3 blocks with their art supplies. Numbers have depleted seriously over this time. So I'm just wondering what, as a council, we can do to actually help them with their problem.
Through Mr Mayor, we'll take that one on notice, investigate that and advise Alderman.
Thank you. Councillor Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Derwent Ferries used their social media during the week to say that, during last week, that they'd been requested to provide a ferry service, and which they were very pleased to do, in relation to travelling from Hobart to the AFL match at Blunston. Mr Mayor, did Council make that request as part of the Bellary Vogel Transport Plan?
Not that I'm aware of, Alderman Mulder. I think that was a state government initiative.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of question time. Also brings us to the end of the open session of council. Could you please close the feed?
Is that a motion to go into closed meeting?